My name is Jason Williams, aka JP Slouch, also known as Broom. I've been making music since I was a kid. I think around 8 years old, and it's my passion. Along the way, I've met up with some pretty interesting characters, all with their own unique stories, views, and talents. This podcast show celebrates those friends I've amassed in my many years of ups and downs, in this crazy trip that we all call life. Join me as I go 4 drinks deep with JP Slouch and Pals. Going the earphone route, huh?
Yeah, I don't have a door to this room. So
all their secrets will be known throughout the whole house now, then.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, I finally got you down in a 4 drinks deep session, which is, like, exciting for me, right? Because, like, we haven't really had a one-on-one chat in a little bit. I think it was, like, Chris He's birthday, right? It was the last time we talked.
Oh, yeah.
That
was fun, man.
That was a fun night. Yeah, that was at the end. It got a little blurry at the end for me, but
really?
Yeah, a little bit. I guess tell the world who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm known as Dan Lactose. I've been messing around with sounds and pictures for a long time.
Yeah, very long time, man. I remember I remember back in the days in high school, man, like there was always the legend of Dan Billeri, because I heard about your name through the illustrious David Alberto Leach, the prophet, right?
My oldest friend.
And you know how the Leach stories can kind of get, tall tale-ish, right? A little bit. So, like, by the time I first met you, I thought you were, like, 12 foot tall, could, like, friggin' lightning from the skies and stuff, with, like, the crazy stories that Leach would say. He's a really great hype man. But I think we first, like, met one-on-one was through the Slobber tape. You recorded the Eat Me cassette tape that we did over at Leach's house.
Oh,
back in the days.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. But I knew you from before through the Sheep Squeeze tape. That session was pretty grueling. It was fun. It was rad. It was like, was that your first recording thing that you did with us at that time, or?
It might have been the first time I recorded other people that, wasn't something that I was playing on.
Yeah, so it was pretty cool experience. Did strip with Sheep Squeeze and everything. Like I said, I knew in Leach's stories and all that, and so it was a big build up. But at that time, you have been doing like so much music. At that time, you were in like a couple bands and everything. Can you take me back to what was the start of your first musical that you heard that you're like, oh man, this is something I want to do? Like, what influenced you to do that?
Probably Leach, actually, because he got a drum set for Christmas, I believe. And I had kind of messed around. Like, I had this little Muppets drum set that was a hand-me-down from somebody, but it was kind of jacked up. And I was really into it, so I was bashing on it hard. And it's a toy, and I busted the kick drum head, and I kept trying to repair it, but it just sounded horrible. And, eventually, my parents were like, it's taking up too much space in the garage. And so we got rid of it. And I think that was before Leach actually got real drums. And then he got those for Christmas or his birthday. And I was like, all right, well then I guess I gotta, get a guitar because, you know, we got to have a band and we can't have two drummers, you know? So I was like, I'll get the guitar.
Nice. What was the name of that band?
So that band kind of had some different names. Like we called it Useless Youth, but we also called it Dead Hippies. So that was just me and him, and we recorded some things in his garage. You know, it was mostly like improvised, you know, do some covers of songs like The Cramps. I had been turned on to The Cramps early on, and so, you know, it's really simple guitar lines kind of, so I was trying to emulate that. You know, Leach had no idea what he was doing. It was pretty like avant-garde sounding, you know, because it was just like two people playing completely separate things. We actually made, you know, some recordings, and I had fashioned it into kind of a demo tape, but I didn't have a double cassette deck. But I'd already made a cover, and I'd already designed like, you know, a sticker to put on the tape label. So this is like probably summer of 6th grade. And then in 7th grade, I met Chris, and like within the first couple days of school, you know, or probably even that first day of meeting him, I was like, hey man, do you have a double cassette deck? You know? And he was like, oh yeah. I was like, well, can I come over after school and put my demo together? You know, my band has this demo, but I don't have any way to like assemble it from all the different tapes, right? Make the master tape and then some copies. And so that was like right when I met Chris. And then I went to his house and did that, and he was blown away because he was just like, what, you made all these songs? And I was like, oh yeah, you know, and he was tripped out, man.
So like right when you first met Chris, the first thing you said was like, "Oh, do you have a double tape player?" Right when you saw him.
Probably, you know, kids are weird, man. You know, it was like right at the forefront of my thoughts at that point, you know. Plus, it was like, you know, you're meeting people like it's like first day of school or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
second day of school. But I met him very early on in 7th grade, and then we were just kind of, you know, inseparable. And Leach was going to a different school. So Leach is my oldest friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
Met Leach in kindergarten. So we went to St. Pius, and that's where, like, you know, Tomatis, I met Tomatis in kindergarten as well. But me and Leach were really kind of like bonded really fast, you know, because we were into superheroes and comic books, and specifically the cartoon Star Blazers, which, you know, I was super into, right? So when I met him, he knew that. And my buddy Donnie Beck, I met him in preschool, I believe, St. Pius kindergarten together. And then we both met Leach, right? And Leach knew Star Blazers, and I used to watch Star Blazers at Donnie's house. He had an older brother and sister, and they were super into like anime, you know, like before anybody called it that, you know, we called it Japanese animation.
Yeah.
And so they were watching Robotech and Captain Harlock, and so I would always go over there and watch that. I was over there all the time, so I'd be watching that there. They kind of turned me on to that. So then I met Leach, and he was into it. So me, Leach, and Donnie were just like playing Star Blazers. You know, we were like instant friends. I think the first thing first music I heard that really kind of made me say like, oh, you know, I can break down how they put this together in my head, and, you know, I could maybe make something like this, was when I first heard rap music. Probably License to Ill had just come out, you know, and I think Tomatis had Run DMC, and then my friend that I played soccer with played me License to Ill, and that blew me away. You know, I was like, whoa. So I was trying to like write raps or figure out a way to like make rap songs. And back then it was vinyl, right? Cassettes, kinda, but it was mostly vinyl. You know, you get the 45, and some of them had instrumentals. I would try to like write songs over the instrumental that kind of sounded like rap, but the beats weren't rap. You know, they were like a rock beat. So I would do these weird kind of spoken songs, and then I tried to get friends to get on them. And I had a tape recorder that my parents had bought me. And once I got that, like I was taping everything, the television, putting on these instrumental 45s, and then singing my own lyrics on top, you know, making songs that way. So it was like a school project we had, me and Leach and Tomatis, Donnie, and our friend Joaquin got together to do a song for it. So we formed this like group, right, that did this song, which is basically us. I think it was the We built this city on rock and roll. You know, like the instrumental. We made a song to go over that, and we recorded it, and then we submitted it as our class project. And the song was called Telephone Madness, and the group was called the DJs. It was all of our names started with D except for Joaquin. That was like my first music thing. We were like, we got a band, you know,
Yeah.
and it was kind of cool to like see the reaction of the other kids.
And through that, that's when you decided you wanted to start doing music in a band from that point? Or
I
was
mean, I guess like really for me, man, like the big thing that I was really into was zines.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was really obsessed with printing, like doing print before the music. Comics were kind of like the first thing I dabbled in, like drawing and printing and selling my own comic books. And I made like that all kind of started when Garbage Pail Kids, you
Yep.
know, were like happening. I can't remember what year that was, maybe like 86. Everybody was into it, right? So I went home one day and I made up my own newsletter, you know, about Garbage Pail Kids. And then I hand wrote it, you know, and then my dad took it to work and ran off some copies and I brought it to school and I passed him out. That was like my first foray into publishing. I think it was called The Garbage Line. And then I don't know how I got like the idea to start doing comic books, but I got pretty deep into that to the point where I got turned on to other magazines where you could send them in and get reviewed. And then I started trading with people and buying other people's and sending them out in the mail. And I had all these pen pals all over the place, you know. And then me and Leach actually started, me, Leach, and Chris. When I met Chris, I kind of turned him onto this thing. We started a little magazine where we reviewed comics that people sent to us.
Damn, so that's really smart because you found a way to get free like comics and stuff too back then.
Yeah, it was a lot of trading, you know. I will say like we got some stuff in Lee's Comics when he was in Palo Alto, like the first store. I was going to a lot of comic book conventions back then, and I met people there. And so I met a guy who worked at Comic Relief in Berkeley.
Yep.
He was like, yeah, if you make it out to Berkeley, you know, like we'll buy some comics off you. So I asked my mom and she took me out there and they bought some of my comics. It was pretty cool, man.
Yeah, so that's neat. So what were you into comic wise? I mean, what were the ones that you were super collecting?
The black and white explosion thing was happening, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
You know, early, I got into them maybe around like issue 4. You know, that just blew me away. And a lot of other stuff that was happening. Flaming Carrot. I got really into this comic book called Ultra Klutz. I just would go up to people at the conventions, man, and be like, hey, check out my comic, you know? And it was not very good, but I didn't care, you know? I just kind of wanted to be a part of it, I guess, or, you know, just get feedback.
What was your comic character?
So my comic company was called X-Ray Comics. I had a character called Captain Chaos. My thing was like, I was really more like into it for the art and the publishing side. I wasn't really like developing these characters very well, or I wasn't really writing good stories, you know, like I really needed to meet somebody who kind of did that. I would have maybe not done music, you know, I might not have gotten around to it.
Wow.
Well, back then comics were frowned on.
Yeah, conventions weren't as big as they are now. You would never see any girls at any convention, only just be dudes. And now it's like
moms,
girls are there all
sisters
dressed
that
up.
had to bring their little brothers. But yeah, now it's like, you know, it's like going to a car show. So yeah, I mean, you know, I would just go up to people. I met a ton of people just going up, but the Ultra Klutz guy was one of those people. I gave him a bunch of comics, and he actually sent me a typewritten letter, like thoroughly critiquing my comic page by page, which it blew my mind. You know, I must have read that letter over and over so many times, right? I kind of maintained a little friendship with him by seeing him at conventions. And then my grandmother lived in Chico. And so one time I was up there and, you know, I talked to my mom and I was like, hey, you know, can I contact Jeff and see, you know, if he'll come over and like deliver some stuff I want to buy off him? And so he came over to my grandmother's house and I bought one of the original pages from Ultra Klutz. In that mini comic scene, people would do like jam drawings, you know, where it's like 2 or 3 people would like work on the same drawing, you know, and they call it a jam. So me and my friend Donnie, we were working on this drawing and we asked Jeff, like, hey, would you join in on this for a jam, you know? And he was like, oh, yeah. So he drew, like, you know, the Ultra Klutz, the alternate identity, secret identity dude. I think his name's Kenji. He drew that guy.
From there, what changed from you? Because you were saying you were going to be probably a comic person.
I wanted to be a comic book artist. Back then, there was no instructors who, like, understood what I was, like, comics, right? Because you got to look at, like, the time. When did all the EC stuff go bust? Like 1955. You know, Mr. Chimera at Woodside. Comics weren't a part of they weren't very big, you know, for his childhood, because they were all sanitized and lame. That generation, he didn't understand what I was trying to do. Yeah, so punk rock really, like, came, skateboarding and punk basically, like, took over my life.
Can you tell me a brief thing about Captain Chaos? What's a brief story of like who he was and how he became that?
So he was just kind of like a dude with long hair and a trench coat and a big gun, you know? And he just was like blasting everything. You know, we were kind of like, thought the Punisher was cool. I was also really into the old horror stuff, you know, like the ECs, and because you could go to the conventions, man, and there'd be like 25 cents, just like old dead stock from the 60s of like horror comics just piled up on the floor, like 25 cents each. Just go through and grab, you know, huge armloads of them. You know, Captain Chaos was kind of, he didn't really go. I had better characters. Like, we came up with one called Mr. Nice Guy. That one kind of me and Joaquin came up with. He was kind of like this super nice, friendly guy with this big smile, you know. But then if you just like pushed him like bar, you know, it was like falling down kind of thing. And that was a fun...
So Mr. Nice Guy after a while.
Yeah. So that was a fun character because everybody wanted to draw him. So we kind of had like a little staff of artists for our little comic company. I think we did something called Con Comics that we used to like make just for conventions we went to give out for free. And I think Leech would always have a page in there.
And so that's when you were saying you're getting into more of the punk stuff and everything, right? 7th grade-ish, I would say.
Yeah, I was already kind of into some bands like The Clash, right? Mm-hmm. So Combat Rock, my friend's older brother had that on cassette and would play it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is really good, you know? Like, I like this music. I know I had like bought a Sex Pistols tape, I think just because maybe I'd seen the imagery. And then I saw the tape at Rainbow Records. I'm also listening to metal too, right? So like Ozzy, Iron Maiden, you know, more hair metal type stuff, I guess, was like really big. Well, because I don't have like an older brother or sister, right? Mm-hmm. So that was just like seeing logos maybe on people's shirts and wanting to like be like, oh, that looks crazy, you know, like maybe I'll ask my mom if she'll get me this Ozzy Osbourne tape, you know. Then I did the Columbia House, like probably every kid back then did, and got their parents stuff, paying like $200 or something for all the albums that come as part of the contract. Mm-hmm. And so I signed up for metal because you have to pick a genre. I was hearing like whatever they were sending me. I know like Maiden, definitely. I think the Ozzy, Randy Rhoads tribute album was part of that. But then other stuff too, I think like Bon Jovi, that was considered metal. Trying to like get into the heavier, you know, I was intrigued by the weirder, darker, faster, especially all the imagery. You know, I was a skateboarder too, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, Powell Peralta with all the, you know, skeletons and all that. And so I'm reading Thrasher magazine, you know, probably started reading that in 85. So I'm flipping through that and I'm seeing band names, you know, stickers on boards. You know, they had record reviews in there. Pusshead had a column in there. And so I'm reading all that stuff and kind of soaking it in, but also like, where do you find this stuff, you know? I remember I was really into the Phantom of the Opera, like the original one. There was, in the Pusshead article, he's talking about this band called Death Side, and the image of the cover is Phantom of the Opera. And I remember like writing that down, and every time I'd go to Rainbow Records, I'd look for Death Side. I mean, it was this, you know, obscure Japanese hardcore record pressed in Japan with no distribution, you know, over here, but I'm looking for it every time. Like, maybe I'll find that.
Maybe one day.
I had no idea. You know, I had no idea. It was hard to even learn about something to try to find. Skating, I just, had those little plastic banana boards, and I used to always zip around on those. And then, I got some hand-me-downs. I ended up with some, really shitty Nash that I was super embarrassed about, because Nash was just like poser shit. So I painted it all crazy so that you couldn't tell it was a Nash, but everybody knew, about the shit. So I rode that, and then then I ended up getting like a real professional, Santa Cruz, Rob Roscop, Rapones, and the whole nine. And I was just drawn to that on my own, just seeing kids doing it, and then just kind of turn some friends on to it, because I wasn't turned on by really anybody. That just kind of happened, I think, from me watching people and being like, I want to do that, But I wasn't like keeping up on all the new tricks and everything. I just kind of like to hang out with people and, try to nail a couple things, get a clean line, one clean line in, and hang out with your buddies and get some food, make a day of it. The next thing that I did before the comic books was I did a skateboard magazine. And I actually did that for several issues. Back then there was no parks, it was like skateboarding was really kind of not something to aspire to do. It wasn't really like, it wasn't going to win you any friends, like basically like comic books, like comic books back then, man, you were a
It was a
nerd.
death sentence back in the days. You were a nerd if you did that,
And skateboarding was worse because you were almost like a target for physical violence. Through going to these shops, they used to throw these jams, they called them. People would bring out a bunch of their ramps to like a school on a specific day, and then everybody would go out, they'd arrange it into like a course, and you'd go out there and they just have the ramps out there all day. So I started going to these skate jams and, skating, but also taking photos. And then I'd try to put them in my little magazine, and I do the skate zines, and maybe even before, probably around the same time as the comic stuff, me and Leach start trying to do the band. So we started this band. Then when I met Chris, we bring Chris in, right? And Chris is on vocals. And we change the name and we bring Donnie in. And Leach has gotten better at drums because he's been taking lessons. We changed the name of the band to Disruption. And we do like a recording where we wrote, I don't know, maybe like 4 or 5 songs with Leach, 2 guitars, me and Don, no bass. Chris is doing vocals. It's like I have this history with Leach from kindergarten, right? But he didn't start going to Kennedy with me, and Donnie went to Kennedy, and we met Chris. We bring Chris into our kindergarten world, and he's kind of like, that guy's not very good at drums. And he's like, I think I could do it. And I was like, but you don't have a drum set. So kind of around this time, I discover that people make zines about music. So I'm like, oh, I want to make a zine about music. I had discovered Maximum Rock and Roll, the zine, at Tower Records, right? So I started going to Tower Records and, buying maybe one punk album on vinyl and a magazine. So I bought Maximum Rock and Roll and read it cover to cover like multiple times, just absorbed it, And I was like, wow, you can make these music zines too. But I decided to try my hand at the music magazine, but I didn't really know very much about music, right? I'm still kind of stabbing and finding things. At this point, I'm going to the Warehouse or Rainbow Records, and I'm buying like probably a tape like a week. I determined what I wanted by either the cover looked crazy or the band sounded nuts, or I'd seen it in Thrasher magazine. There was also like Rip magazine, which was kind of the more extreme metal magazine, Also going to Kennedy, meeting people that were playing us stuff like SOD. I think that was around when I heard Metallica for the first time, was, early on in 7th grade. I was a little late to all that, just because I didn't have somebody to hit me to it. So I kind of was checking that out, trying to check out this independent DIY stuff, but finding some of it, around at Warehouse and Rainbow Records. And then eventually when I started going to Tower, it's like, oh shit, I'm finding records that were pressed in Switzerland and France and not Japan, which I was always like looking for Japanese stuff.
Still trying to find the elusive album, right?
Exactly. But yeah, just trying out crazy shit, like buying the second Napalm Death album on a whim and just totally being floored by it, and that was 7th grade. We start calling it Disruption, and I bring those other people in to like meet Leach, I'm reading Maximum Rock and Roll and I'm seeing all this like people releasing their own recordings on cassette and 7-inch and whatever, just the DIY thing, right? And I'm like, man, I want to make stuff. You know what I mean? I was doing the music zine and sending it out to people, like trading zines, I guess my first issue, and I sent it to a guy in San Jose who did the zine. His zine was called Punk Styles of the Rich and Famous. We started trading zines and then traded phone numbers and talked on the phone and stuff. My zine was called Spinal Remains. We start trading and talking, and he's like, oh, I'm in this band and I'm starting this tape label. And I was like, tape label? Like, what's that? And I was like, man, I want to start a tape label. I think I probably mentioned it to Chris, and he was like, yeah, let's do a tape label. So we started a label called Beef Treat. Almost like a dog's treat. And I think Chris came up with that. It seems like something Chris probably came up with. So we started this thing called Beef Treat, and we started making tapes. And the first tape we did was kind of the new Disruption without Leach. Chris was playing drums on cardboard boxes. We started doing these recordings almost every day after school, trying to write songs or improvising songs with him on drums on the boxes and like, a dustpan and just different things for percussion. And Don was playing guitar or bass, trying to play bass by setting the tone of his guitar really bassy and just playing like the top string. And, we were just goofing around. But we were recording all these things. At this point, I have a double cassette deck finally, right?
Finally.
Finally. Although it was a piece of shit. Man, it was just really shitty. But I started taking all these tapes, and it was like we'd record all this material over at Don's house after school. I'd go home, I'd edit it together into some kind of release, and then I'd make a cover, and then I'd show those guys the next day, and they'd be like, wow, okay. So I was building up this catalog of all these like releases of things that we just kind of made on the fly. Another person who joined into this when I met Chris, because his best friend was Gary. So Gary was really on board with doing this, man, and just really like clever with words and really funny. And he mostly did like a lot of like singing and ideas. So it was like me, Chris, and Gary did a lot of stuff together. And I was usually playing guitar, Chris was playing drums, and Gary just like took it wherever, like.
And this is still Disruption right now.
No, so now we're doing all these different bands, but it's all the same people, right?
Okay.
Because we're trying to build up this catalog of the Beef Treat label. We're trying to make a tape label, but it's all just a bunch of bands with like me and Chris.
It's your own label with your own bands on it, basically.
Probably made like 10 or 12 releases on that label.
Wow. Do you remember the names of some of the bands on there?
Yeah, so there's a band. So we tried to do like a noisecore band, because at this point, like the Meat Shits and Sore Throat and all that, AC, we're happening with like 5,000 song tapes. And we're like, man, so we did a noisecore band, me and Chris, called SBA, Surrounded by Assholes. So then some other bands, let's see, there was a band called Frent. That was mainly Chris and Gary's thing, and I kind of weaseled my way into that down the road. But that was actually a long-running thing, and we actually played a show in my parents' garage on Halloween to like just whoever was walking by. We were all dressed up, and we had all these crazy lights and stuff. It was really bizarre. But that was like a band that we kind of, after Disruption, took that seriously. Frent was like the first real serious kind of thing I guess I did musically. Well, also, so related to that guy from San Jose, Zine, right? He was like, hey, have you ever been to CFY? And I was like, what's CFY? He said, it's a punk record store in Palo Alto. I was like, really? In Palo Alto? There's a punk record store? He's all, yeah, man, it's really hard to find. It's in a really weird spot. But I went there and they took some zines from me. They're selling my zine there. You should go there and bring your zine. And I was like, man, where is this place? So there's no internet. Like, how do I find out about this place? So I knew there was some weird punk record store in Palo Alto somewhere. And around the time when we were doing Frent and me, Chris, and Gary were hanging out a lot, we rode our bikes everywhere. Like, we had paper routes. So on the weekend, we started riding our bikes down to Lee's Comics, Palo Alto, Barron Park. right? Because he had moved there from the Alma Street one. And so we would ride our bikes down there, and there was a record store right next door called Record Heaven. So we'd go check out Record Heaven, and we'd check out Lee's, and then we'd ride back home. So one day we're at Lee's, or I guess we're at Record Heaven, and we're going out to unlock our bikes to ride home, and this older guy is unlocking his bike, and he was like, hey, Tower Records is they're gonna stop selling vinyl, so they're having a big sale. All their vinyl's on sale. I'm going there right now. So we ended up riding our bikes, kind of, not with that guy, but right behind him. We rode to Tower Records in Mountain View. So we started doing that, and one of the times we were doing that, I just happened to notice like this. We're in Palo Alto, like nearing University Avenue, and I just happened to notice this really weird building at the end of this block that was all spray painted, crazy and stuff. And I was like, "Hey guys, like maybe that's the record store I heard about." And I remember especially Donnie was like really reluctant, man. Like he was very reluctant to go down there. I think me and Chris kind of rode down the block halfway. We're like, whoa, this place looks crazy, and music was blasting out of it. And I was like, dude, that's got to be the record store, like, let's go. And he was like, Don doesn't want to go. And like, all right, well, next time, man, when it's me and you, we're going, So the next time we went down there, we went to that record shop, and that's how we met Eugene. It was his shop. Yeah. So that was the shop. We went down there, and we're like, oh shit, this is the store. Talked to him. He's super, nice and friendly to us. And, he takes some of my zines, puts them on the rack. Discovering CFY kind of also coincided with us meeting Brent Field and starting Sheep Squeeze. I remember like the second or third time we went to CFY, I brought a tape of us playing, and I wanted to play it for Eugene. And I was like, hey, we have this band, and I just wanted to play this for you, So he plays the tape, and he's like, this is good. We're like, really? Yeah. He's like, you just need a better recording. Let me go introduce you to Bart right now.
Oh shit.
Introduce you to Bart Thurber. So we're like, okay. So we walk down the hallway, and Bart's, recording, and Eugene's like, hey Bart, sorry to bother you. I just want to introduce these kids. They got this band called Sheep Squeeze. And he's like, oh, you want to record? We're like, yeah. He's like, when? And he looks at the calendar. We're like, I don't know. Like, how much does it cost? I think it was like $100. We're like, okay, well, we could probably come up with $100, like in, a month, and so we make a recording date, and then we tell Brent, like, hey, we got a recording at this real studio. And at that point, Brent was like, you found that place? And we tell him how to get there. So he goes there and brings his zines and checks it all out. So we have a recording date to record with Bart Thurber, Sheep Squeeze.
So going back, you guys, the tape that you gave Eugene, was that Sheep Squeeze or was that your old band?
No, so when we met Brent, we wanted to do something totally new. So how I met Brent was, Maximum Rock and Roll magazine, they had classifieds in the back. And there was a lot of people like, we're looking for a drummer, in Phoenix, Arizona that listens to Chumbawamba and Crass, and or I'm a prisoner, I just want girls to write to me about, like Boston hardcore or something. There's all sorts of fucked up shit in there. So I used to always read those, and there was one from Brent, and he was like, drummer looking for a band. I'm into these bands. And, it was probably like Napalm Death, The Dwarves, like just a total random assortment of bands that we were like, oh, wow, and it was a Sunnyvale address. And I was like, damn, Sunnyvale, this guy's close by. If he has a car, maybe he'd be down to play with us. So I sent him a letter, and, he wrote me back, and we ended up like talking on the phone, and I invited him to Chris's house, much to the chagrin of our parents, like,
now, who's this crazy guy from Sunnyvale you're inviting over to the house?
Well, so I find out he's actually from New Hampshire, right? And he met a dude through doing zines that lived in Sunnyvale. So he came out here, and then, really didn't know what to do with himself. He was living in a shed at this guy's house, and his like living situation was really bad because by the time we met him, he was basically not allowed to live where he was living. And those people were pushing him out, making fun of him, making his life hell. Like, get your shit together, dude. It wasn't a fun time for that guy, but we managed to like wrangle him into like writing some material and recording a bunch of stuff. At one point he was living in a tent in my parents' backyard. And my parents were just like, this guy, you know, is a mess. And he came out here to like play in bands. He had a drum set. He had a car, which I think he ended up selling because he just couldn't afford to have it. Living those rock dreams, dude.
Yeah.
Followed his punk rock dreams to the land of maximum rock and roll. You know what I mean? San Francisco, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Followed all the way to your parents' backyard.
Yeah, to Chris's parents. So, you know, linked up with him, and he did a zine called Strange Damage. So that just kind of encouraged me to keep doing what I was doing. I think at this point I had changed my zine. It changed names to Breakfast with Earl. Yeah.
Where'd that go? What's that mean?
I don't know. Me and Chris, man, we just would come up with all these weird sayings and stuff. So yeah, when we first started jamming, it was kind of like, what are we going to call it? You know, and he came up with that name. He came up with Sheep Squeeze, Brent did. He was kind of a zany dude. Our senses, even though he was older, you know, like our sense of humor was really silly and stuff. And also at the same time, through the mail, we had met Sockeye and just became obsessed with how he had this label called Wheelchair Full of Old Men. And it was like he released a tape of a new band with a different name like almost every week. I mean, it was crazy. So it was really in tune with what we were, you know, kind of trying to do. And it inspired us to like really be prolific with the tapes. So we were recording a lot of Sheep Squeeze stuff that was still kind of like improvised songs on a lot of things, but also trying to kind of write songs that we could perform like, you know, over and over again that sounded the same. And part of that was like going into the studio. Like, you know, I knew that we were going to have to go in there with songs that we had practiced. That kind of turned Brent off. He was like wanting to keep it looser. I think, you know, this is when I kind of stepped in and started being like the control freak, I guess, of the band. Something we learned when we got into the studio with Bart is we didn't have any endings. we didn't know how to end any of our songs. They just go on forever. That was a learning thing. We tried to incorporate my friend Donnie, who's going by Don at this point. We tried to incorporate him in the band, but then when we got the recording date, he rehearsed with us a few times, and then he was like, I can't do the recording. Oh, Brent had a bass, so he was playing Brent's bass. So I was like, now we have a real band with guitar, bass, drums, and Chris was singing, right? It was coming together, finally. Then we find out Don's not going to be able to go play bass at the recording. It's like, oh, shit. Well, we're still going to do it, right? So we go in, and Bart's like, well, where's your amp? And I had like a little Fender Squire. He's like, no, you can't use that, you know?
I love Bart's constructive criticism with all the bands.
He's a producer. I mean, he doesn't even want to be. He wants to just be called the recording guy. But man, he produces.
Oh yeah.
I learned what a producer does. It's like that guy's producing. I mean,
oh yeah.
He's making every recording better, though. You know what I mean?
He is. He definitely
pushes you to do more because it's like this is the time, man. This is the time to really give it your all. And he doesn't want recordings floating around that he did that are crummy.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Where the band sucks, like they can't figure out how to end the song, and it just goes on for 10 minutes. Like, so we go there. He's like, play out of this amp. And I think it was like the Gutter Sluts. Remember that band?
Oh yeah.
So I think because Bart jammed with them, so all their gear was in the studio room. So we ended up playing out of their guitar rig. I was like, I'm gonna overdub bass, I guess. I brought Brent's bass. Bart was like, you can't play that bass. You know, it's buzzing. It's like totally destroyed. I think it just had like 2 strings on it. So he lends me a bass and hooks me up with the Gutter Sluts bass rig. So then I play bass. Also, we recorded it all live. We didn't know that you could like overdub the vocals later. So every take, Chris is singing his heart out. And so that's how we did it, man. And then overdubbed the bass. And then we put out a cassette. I was really proud of it. I think Brent was kind of like, okay, we got those songs out of us. Like, now let's make wacky stuff again, you know? But I was like, no, these are our songs, you know? We got to play a show.
And what was the name of that cassette?
It was called Everything We Touch Turns to Sheep. Brent also tells us about this record pressing plant called Archer, which is in Detroit. And he has the catalog and shows it to us. And we're like, wow, it's not very expensive to like press a record. So we decide we want to put some of those songs on a 7-inch, me and Chris. So with our paper route money, we put out that first Sheep Squeeze 7-inch with Leech on the cover. Like, well, that's in the works. Brent leaves. Brent goes back to New Hampshire. We're like, well, we have this band, we have this record, you know? Oh wait, no, I'm wrong. What happens while we're working on that 7-inch is I meet Rob Beckstrom. So I meet Rob because Rob goes to CFY, he buys one of my zines, and he sees it's from Redwood City, and then he writes me a letter. And then I write him back, like, dude, you're in Menlo Park, you know? And I think he even says, like, I skateboard or whatever, so we trade. I'm like, here's my phone number, you know, give me a call. So he calls me up, we hit it off, we both skateboard, you know, he's doing a zine. I'm like, man, I want to check out your zine, you know? I tell him I'm in this band, and he's like, oh, man, I play bass. I'm like, are you serious? Like, we need a bass player, you know, you're in the band.
Mm-hmm.
So I give him the Everything We Touch Turns to Sheep tape, and he's blown away. He can't believe that we made that, you know. He wants to be a part of the record so bad, right? He might have even have thrown in some money, but he did draw the side B label. So that was actually his first part of being a part of Sheep Squeeze. And because he did that, I put a little picture of him inside the insert, you know, saying this is our new bass player. He's not on this record, but, you know, he's in the band now. So then we did another session. Probably the day we were doing that one, we booked another one already with Bart because we're like, this is the most fun we've ever had in our lives, you know, like making this music. And now we understand it better. So let's do it again, and this time we'll come in more prepared. So we book another session. Then we immediately start writing some new stuff, and Rob is a part of that. We knew, like, oh, we have all these tracks we can like add things to later, you know. We did a crazy song with Brent where he basically was like, I'm filling up every track. He was like, if you guys are gonna make me like learn all these songs and play all these songs over and over like a real band, I get to make a crazy song. And that one we filled up like every track. It's kind of funny, like my girlfriend at the time, I brought one of her dog's toys that I used to squeeze like on that song. And when we listened to the song at her house, the dog would go crazy. But we like put my dad snoring on it, and just all this stuff, like tapes that we found on the ground. There's like a song called Lord on Wheels, and there's a part where there's preachers talking, and it like we took it from, it was a tape we found on the ground. You know, we were always kind of like, if we found it, we needed to use it, even if it wasn't really good. Like the cover of the Sockeye Split 7-inch, which is what, so these sessions, the Sockeye Split, the It's Not Working record, that's where that came from the second recording. So the cover, our cover for the Sockeye Split is a photo that we found on the ground of like obviously some people like moving out of their house and this guy like posing very strangely in front of the moving van. And I mean, I don't know, we just thought it was like the funniest thing ever.
Brent recorded, he left. Why did he leave after recording? Because he was still wanting to do his crazy shit, like you said, right?
Well, I think like he was struggling, man. Just like, you know, living wise, you know, like his whole living situation was bad. So he went back to he might have actually gone to Arizona, I think is where he went first, and tried to make a living out there. His kind of like last opportunity to remain in the Bay Area was living at my parents' house in the backyard, and that was like a no-go. So yeah, he bailed after that. Yeah.
You guys started playing shows.
Kind of like between the tape and the first 7-inch, I met Thomas from Plutocracy. I'd gone to Kennedy with him and I knew who he was, and I met Tizzo, but I hadn't met Thomas. So then when I'm a freshman in high school, he's in one of my classes and he's sitting next to me. So we start talking, you know, and I'm doing my zine, and, you know, I can't remember how we ended up really like figuring out, like he was in Pluto at that point. He had just joined. So they had like a rehearsal demo, and he's like, hey, if I give you this flyer, you know, will you print it in your zine? And I was like, sure. So I did. And then I gave him a copy, and then he showed it to Max, and Max was tripping. Like, who are these guys that go to your school? They do a zine, they have a band. He's like, yeah, they got a band called Sheep Squeeze. That's why we're mentioned on that first Plutocracy record. I think the Flexi and the first Sheep Squeeze 7-inch kind of came out around the same time. So it was kind of like, oh, there's like a thing. I think they were kind of tripping, like, who is this guy? You know, like, because they had a little group of people doing stuff. But me and Chris kind of came out of nowhere with this weird ass punk record. So Max becomes aware of me at that point. But I hadn't met Stinkweed or Max I just knew Thomas.
And you guys have not played live yet.
We played a show at CFY at one point.
So how did you get onto a CFY show without playing a live show? That's insane.
Eugene was like, play a show here.
So they were all really into you guys.
He was very supportive, man. I mean, I gotta say, like, he was kind of an adult figure that like encouraged us. Very supportive, man.
So besides Chris He's Garage, would you say that's your first show that you played?
Yeah, I believe that was the first show. And then Rob, through like some skateboarders in like Palo Alto, because me and Rob were skating heavy. He introduced me to all these kids in Palo Alto. Through somebody there, they got us a show at Castellea, all girls school.
Yeah, or the rad show.
That was really weird. All these Palo Alto skater guys were there, and they were like just going crazy, man, freaking everybody out, which was cool. But like we got cut off. I mean, it was totally punk and chaotic.
How was it with your first show? Like, were you nervous? Were you kind of like tell me what you went through?
I just didn't think anybody was going to show up, and barely anybody did. It was just us. I didn't know, like, get other bands. I didn't know any other bands. I mean, it was very innocent, and just, like, we kind of jammed. And the funny thing was, I was writing to a lot of people, like pen pal and tape trading, through the zines, a lot of letter writing. Like, I was getting stuff in the mail every day. And I was writing to this girl who lived in Oakland. I think she was in, like, a halfway house or like, a group home, right? Or something. She was like a fuck up. Somehow we started writing to each other, and I sent her a flyer for the thing, and she talked somebody from the place into driving her out there. But I didn't know that was going to happen. Right? So they showed up late. And when they showed up, it was like, oh, wow, you're her, like, holy crap. Like, I wish you would have told me you were coming out here, because we already played. And the lady was like, yeah, we drove all the way here, and we had to go through everything to get her to come. So we're like, fuck it, we'll play again. So we played again.
Nice. And you felt comfortable and fine just playing your first show? It was like no nervousness, no nothing.
I mean, there was really nobody there, man. And we were so comfortable at CFY, and Eugene just made us like feel totally at ease. I think like once we met him and the way he like treated us, I felt like, hey, this is like a thing where when you're in a band, man, all these people in bands, they kind of like help you out so that you can do your band shit. Which to some extent is really true.
Yeah.
But also, like, people, I mean, they're not all going to help you out.
No, that's the thing you find out later on. So straight up, you played Sheep Squeed, played their first couple of shows and everything, and they went pretty successful.
So then we were actually asked, so through the Plutocracy thing, got asked to play Gilman Street.
Wait, so how many shows did you play before you played Gilman?
Well, we didn't. We didn't play Gilman, but we had played those two shows, like the Castellea one and the CFY one. Castellea one turned out to be a battle of the bands. You know how that shit goes.
I hate battle of the bands.
The worst shit.
Yeah.
But we definitely made a mark as being like not like any other band. Like, number one, a lot of people in Palo Alto didn't know who we were, right? We also played like our own material, which most of the bands that played that night did covers. We were kind of more of like a fully formed band. That night, actually, when we did that, Chris played drums, because when Brent bounced, he left his drum set in Chris's garage. So Chris, already kind of had an inclination to play drums. Just he's got a great sense of rhythm. He started playing Brent's drums, and so he was the drummer, and he would sing some songs, and I would sing some songs. And that's kind of how we kept Sheep Squeeze going with me, him, and Rob. Through meeting the Plutocracy guys, who are just like another Redwood City band, like doing it themselves, not trying to sign to a major label, because that was like,
that was looked down upon.
Yeah, very frowned upon. Like you're pressing your own records. I mean, it's like, you just get props off that, even the record's lousy. Right?
Yeah.
So we get asked to play with fucking Plutocracy, 976, and Sleep,
Whoa.
who had just changed their name from Asbestos Death to Sleep. So I'm like, oh my God, we got to do it, you know? Like, this is insane. I'm also at the same time, I'm also like, we're going to suck. That's kind of our thing. Like, we just get up and have a good time. We would always be like, we suck, you know, whatever. Like, you know, this is why we are the fools. What you guys started calling Dorkcore.
Mm-hmm.
That name actually came from Plutocracy, because they call us Sheep Squeeze Redwood Dorkcore on Dankstas in the song. And then you guys took that, Slobber took that as like, you know, well, we play Dorkcore. But we didn't have a name for it at the time, but we were just, you know, all right, maybe, yeah, I'm thinking, well, we can open this show and just be silly and, you know, be funny, and then all the good bands will play. But Rob was an actual musician, man. He like played in the high school jazz band. So he had a jazz performance that night. So he's like, I can't do it, man. I'm like, what? So we didn't get to play that show.
Oh no. So who played in your place? What band do you know?
I can't remember. I think it's San Jose.
Did you go to the show?
I didn't. I had yet to go to Gilman Street at that point. So I'd been to Pony Express, Redwood City, because that was, you know, for people who don't know, probably very early 90s. They were the venue between San Francisco and San Jose. That was a legit venue that had shows every Friday and Saturday, and probably during the week too, you know, all sorts of music, but it was kind of metal. Like, that was their specialty. Everybody played there, man. Neurosis, Green Day, you know, you name it, of the Lookout bands and all the Melvins and Steel Pole Bathtub and everybody from San Francisco and Berkeley and Oakland. That was a venue that you played in the Bay, you know, pizza place. So I had actually gone there for my first time. A Family Friends band played called Think. They were like a straight edge skater band from Redwood City, like kind of around when the first incarnation of Plutocracy was existing. I knew all these guys from baseball, you know, and my mom was friends with Giovanonis and the Coakleys. So it was kind of like, our son's band is playing, you know, like, so I was allowed to go to that. So that was kind of like my first punk rock show. It was Think and Collateral Damage from Sunnyvale and the Lookouts. I remember Brent was trying to book a show there right before it closed down. He was trying to get us a show there, Sheep Squeeze. So then, yeah, we didn't get to play that Gilman show. At this point, it's like me, Chris, and Rob. I'm not sure how, but Rob meets these guys in San Mateo, and he gets asked to join their band. That band is Punch Drunk. I remember being kind of like, well, shit, what do you mean you're going to join this other band? You know, I'd been on this journey putting this band together, and then he just is like, I'm jamming with these other guys. So he's like, you should go and meet him. It's like, all right. So he takes me to the practice, and I'm like, holy shit, like, these guys are fucking really good musicians. You know, it's like, they're killing it, you know, and they have like a little stage that they built in the garage and everything. And I was like, wow. And they had some originals, but then they also did like Green Day and Bad Religion covers. And it was very much like that kind of sound at the time. And I was like, wow, these guys are killing. I'm like, these guys are going to get so many girls. You know, just because they're like, this band is, and I was like, Rob's just gonna like stop playing with me, man, and he's gonna play with these guys because they're way better. They have this whole like, they got real amps, they got a stage in the garage, and I was like, wow, okay, that's cool. But the flip side of meeting those dudes is they were really intrigued by me. From their perspective, they're like, you've done so much shit. You've already put out a record. You've got the zine, you know, like all this stuff. You're also like, knowledge of punk and hardcore is like way deeper than ours. You know, you're listening to a lot of stuff we don't even know about. Those guys were just really cool because they just kind of respected me for, you know, where I was at. So that was EAD. And Mark Bianchi to be Indian Summer and Space Holiday. And then Jason Crouch was the vocalist, and he was more of a skateboarding guy. And he actually opened that store, All Skate, in San Mateo. And man, meeting Iad and Mark was like huge. You know, those guys are still great friends to this day. Amazing music. So those guys were kind of like me. I'm thinking I'm losing my bass player, you know, to this band. But they were like, you need to bring Sheep Squeeze back. somehow. And Eod's like, I'll play drums. Rob was rehearsing for a show with those guys, and they started playing 2 Sheep Squeeze songs as part of their set. And so they played at Italo's Pizza in Sunnyvale, and me and Chris were there, and we came out and sang like dual vocals, like Extreme Noise Terror, to 2 Sheep Squeeze songs. And people went crazy. And afterwards, everybody was talking to me. And I was like, how do you guys even know about this? But it was known, you know, through like people making tapes or whatever. I had no idea. Through like putting out the record and my zine, I end up meeting this guy named John from San Mateo as well. But he's older than these other guys, but he's still kind of linked into this group. And I'm like, holy shit, like San Mateo is like going off. Mm-hmm. You know, like they got Go Skate, big skate scene. Rob basically brings me in and I meet all these skaters. You know, this is when I meet Frank for the first time. All these people, man. My friend Shane, who we just released a tape together. I got some Redwood people with like Thomas. I met Paylone, you know, but I was afraid of him. Going to Thomas's house, like, who the fuck is this guy, you know? You know, first person I ever knew who had like, you know, full sleeve tattoos, you know, like people didn't have that shit back then. Do you want to dance? He loves to hang out, man, and talk.
Yeah, he's a cool dude. He's a cool dude.
He's an interesting cat. So you know, I'm meeting these guys in Redwood City, meeting these guys in San Mateo. I'm learning about stuff, you know. So I meet this guy John, and he's like, you know, I'm trying to start a band. Maybe you would like to play guitar in it, you know. He wanted to do some kind of more Japanese noise rock, you know, which I kind of didn't really know, but I was learning, like Zenny Giva. You know, he wanted to do something like that band. It didn't click with me at the time because I didn't really know. Now I know how to approach it. But I was like listening to Infest, Man is the Bastard, first recordings, Plutocracy, the early American Crust tapes that were coming out, like Disrupt from Boston, checking out all that kind of like really brutal shit. Of course, like Napalm Death and Carcass, and I was getting kind of more into death metal, Morbid Angel, that kind of stuff, all the earache stuff that was coming out, you know, and getting death metal demos, you know, like Impetigo and Dr. Shrinker, and just writing all these death metal bands and getting these demos straight from them. And really in the zine thing, you know, that's where I was at listening wise, just this brutal death metal, like really heavy hardcore sort of thing. So when John approached me, I was like, okay, cool. You know, I want to do something heavy, you know. I think I was kind of thinking more hardcore, and he was kind of thinking more like, no, this is like post-hardcore. Like, this is more just like heavy rock. Like, we don't need to be in the structure of, you know, fast and, you know. So it didn't really click for me. I was a lot younger than the guys. But we started a band called Clout, and we got a few songs together. So this guy named Gabe, who most recently ran Redwood Coast Cider. They make hard ciders in San Carlos and San Mateo. His parents like ran this nursery school out in Half Moon Bay, and he threw a party, like a show there with all his friends' bands, which were mostly like San Mateo, San Mateo High School people. They had a whole scene that this band Punch Drunk that Rob was playing and was a part of, but you know, I didn't know any of those kids. Clout was asked to play. So I played that. It was kind of crazy to like, that was probably the first time I met Frank. So at that show, you know, at this point, I'd done the 7-inch myself. We did the Sockeye 7-inch. Then Chicken Farm put out the It's Not Working. So we had all these records. And back then, what you would do, you know, is you'd trade records with other people. And then you'd have a box with all these random records from people you traded with. It was like your distribution box, right? That's how you got your records around in that DIY scene. People weren't sending you $100 to buy X amount of copies. They were trading their release and selling it for the, you know, $3. Everything in the box, $3. So I had my box with all that stuff. I had my zines and shirts. We had Sheep Squeeze shirts, and Frank came over and like bought stuff. Like all those guys bought zines and records. They couldn't believe that some local kid was doing it, you know. And that's really how I met those guys, you know.
And Frank was he just there to see the show, or was he in a band at that time?
He was in Radioactive Lunch.
Okay.
And I thought they were great. Crazy, heavy, hardcore stuff. And then they all switched. The last song, they all switched instruments and they did a Beastie Boys cover. And he ripped on bass. Did like a cover of the Melvins' Night Goat. And I was like, holy shit, man. Like, I gotta meet these guys, you know? And I remember, like, funny, because I saw him one time at Go Skate. It might have been All Skate at that point. And I remember being like, yo, man, like, what's up, man? We should hang out, you know? Like, totally trying to be like, yo, let's hang out. And he was kind of like, oh, yeah, I don't know, you know? I gotta get to know this fool because he's just sick, you know?
He was. I remember Frank from the Grammys. That's when I first met him. I think he was in a band with his girlfriend at the time.
Yeah. I think we like traded numbers and we skated together, and that was kind of the beginning. I think like so Clout existed. You know, I'm still friends with Thomas. Tell him I'm in a band called Clout now. And he's like, oh shit, that's like the sickest band name ever, you know?
Yeah, it is the sickest.
So he tells Stinkweed, and they're like, we need Clout stuff. So I had these stickers.
Wait, pause. You haven't met Stinkweed yet.
Haven't met Stinkweed.
Yeah.
But Clout is kind of my, like, Palone to this day still calls me Clout. His girlfriend calls me Clout. Like, that's what they call me. And that goes back to that, because they were like, Clout is just fucking heavy, man.
So who came up with the name Clout? Who came up with that name?
So John came up with it. It was because of the detergent, I think. You know, there's a detergent called Clout.
Is there really?
Yeah, I think that's where he got it.
I've heard of Shout, but not Clout.
The other guy in the band was this guy Joe, and he was even older than John. So, I mean, Joe was probably like 10 years older than me. He kind of had a hard time with that. He didn't like that, you know. And I was like, well, then don't play with me, man. It was kind of a weird band where John was just trying to find. So he was in a band called Amygdala. So John was in Amygdala, but he wanted to do something heavier and louder and crazier, you know. So that was what Clout was supposed to be. Joe had a band that was kind of like Melvin's-ish, that I guess he had been in for a really long time, I learned later. And the guitar player was really jealous when he started jamming with us. And then when the guitarist found out, like, I was a kid, he was like, you know, all, you know, fuck this band.
What?
He ended up like stealing one of my amps from the jam space. And like later,
sounds like an asshole.
Totally. So because like the band was kind of weird, but I was still like, I want to play heavy stuff, because Sheep Squeeze would never play stuff like this. My taste was like gravitating towards really heavy shit. So I had met Dennis Cullen from Atmosphere. So at this point, Thomas and them, Clout, they're blown away. You know, they want Clout shirts, they want the demo, they want, you know, stickers. So I'm giving them all these stickers, and dude, those guys straight up put that shit on their guitars like immediately. Like if you look at pictures of Plutocracy at Fiesta Grande, like Stinkweed and Thomas have Clout stickers on their guitars, you know. They hadn't even heard the band yet.
No, we just like the stickers.
And Max hit me up and was like, hey man, I want like a Clout, because I think I was like, I got a rehearsal tape of like 2 songs that I put together, and I got stickers, and I made a screen, you know, to like screen shirts. And Max was like, I want like a Clout, if I give you a long sleeve shirt, man, will you like screen Clout on it, like the Clout designs on it? And I think that was through Thomas. It was organized. And I was like, sure. So somehow me and Max organized to like meet up at the Rainbow Records at the Woodside Plaza. And there was like a curb behind it that everybody used to skate. That was like my spot because I lived down the street. You know, I was there like every night. So I was like a local of that curb. We met there, we skated. He gave me a long sleeve. I gave him the demo and some stickers. Then we met back up again so I could give him his shirt back. And he was like, I really like this demo, man. Like, would you be interested in doing a band with me? And I was like, a band with you? Like, what kind of band? He's like, well, you know, like, I think Plutocracy's done. And I'm like, what? Like, Plutocracy is fucking sick, man. You guys are, like, killing it. Like, everything, it's like you're just at this point now where it's so insane. It sounds like nothing else. He's like, yeah, it's just not working out. So I was like, dude, I'll jam with you. I kind of, like, it took a while for us to get to the point where we actually started jamming, but we started hanging out because we skated. So he introduces me to Dennis Cullen out, who does a zine called Atmosphere, and he lives out in like Newark. So there's a little ditch out there. We're going out there skating it, meet up with Dennis. Dennis is cool as fuck. I don't know how it ends up happening, but I'm like, hey man, you want to join my band Clout on third guitar? So he does, because he kind of gets that whole Japanese noise kind of thing that, you know, is bubbling up. And we're all checking it out. So I bring Dennis in, and it gets really crushing, and we start writing some cool stuff. And then we play it again at Gabe's family's preschool in Half Moon Bay, and that's the show like Andy's at, where Dennis cuts his eye open during the Clout set. And
Ow, Jesus.
everybody's freaking out because he's like bleeding, and it was like totally crazy. Like
So how did he cut his eye? How did he cut his eye?
he hit the headstock on his eyelid, and then his eye like filled with blood and just like,
Oh,
yeah,
but I'm sure that made the show even more cooler.
legendary.
Yeah.
And so that was the end. That was like the last Clout thing. I don't really know. We never finished recording any of the songs that Dennis was writing with us. What's funny is when Max finally like moved away and got rid of all of his shit, like the last of his shit, he gave me a bunch of tapes that were like, you know, the crucial tapes that he was never going to get rid of. And he gave those to me, and in there was a Clout rehearsal that I had no recollection of, and I listened to it and was like, man, these are all the songs with Dennis, you know, with 3 guitars, and pretty cool. The band fell apart kind of so quickly that it just never circulated, you know.
But so with Clout though, you learned a lot through Clout though, I think, right? Because you're a jam with 2 older musicians, be it they're assholes, but still like it was heavier side.
Oh, totally. Something else I just remembered is through meeting John and Amygdala and all those guys, Sheep Squeeze we played the final show with Brent, which I believe he may have even come back and played with us. The keyboardist of Amygdala's parents had a print shop in Burlingame, and we played a show there outside during the day. And the headlining band was this band called Unwound, who like nobody knew of at the time, you know. They were just touring down from Washington, blew us all away. Unwound, and then they went on to be, you know, pretty well known. Through Clout, I meet Max, and then we kind of start talking about trying to do a band, really fast band, you know, that's hardcore but not death metal. I was just blown away by his record collection, man, and like going to his house and having him play me shit and turning me on to stuff. He started taking me to San Francisco to buy records like every weekend. I was just learning about hardcore, fast hardcore, just all this stuff I'd only read about in zines all these years. You know, he's got all the tapes, all the 7-inches, you know, so I'm kind of like going to class. You know, he's Professor Max now, but he was Professor Max back then, man.
Yeah.
You know, he was kind of one of those guys where the situation could totally go off the rails, and he'd been partying or hanging out the whole time, and he's like kind of, okay, you know, we need to settle this, like, you know, he's on the level.
And people would listen to him. That's the thing. It wasn't like,
yeah, not always though, man. I mean, that all came later. Still got like, you know, 4 or 5 years to go to get to that.
So you and Max first were jamming together, and it was just guitar and drums?
Yeah. We just tried to start writing some stuff, and I was like, holy shit, you know, I'd never play with anybody who could play this fast. And I never really thought about writing material like that, you know, but I liked it. So I think by listening to it so much, I kind of like just had a feel. Started jamming in my parents' garage. Max brought his drums over, and then, he was just really easygoing, man. Like, that's one thing I got to say about when I met him. I was like, wow, it's like when it's time to do music, it's fucking music time. Like, there's no other weird bullshit bringing in. You're not waiting for him to finish some, you know, you jam with some people and they're playing this riff and you gotta wait for them to finish the fucking riff. It's like, dude, we're all here to, you know what I mean? Like, to jam. Like, I'm not here to listen to you do a solo. He was very much like, okay, you know, this is where your skill's at. This is where my skill's at, you know, because we both learned in Spaz, you know, to push ourselves, because Chris Dodge was way more accomplished than either of us, you know, like all the stuff he had done, you know, he'd played way more shows, he'd been in more bands. He kind of pushed us, you know. It was like we set up like a little batch, the demo batch of the idea of Spaz, me and Max, and then when he came on board, you know, we fleshed it out, and it really pushed us all to play differently and better, you know.
And you and Max were jamming how long with you two?
So we jammed, and at some point Max was like, I'm going to book a day with Bart. And I think our goal was like, can we get 10 songs? So he already knew Bart through Plutocracy, right? So at this
Okay.
point, so I start hanging out with Max, and I went to like a plutocracy rehearsal at his parents' house and just kind of hung out. And Thomas was like, okay, but at this point, Max hadn't told anybody that he was going to do a project with me. So then at some point, we decided to jam. We started writing some songs. And then it was determined that Plutocracy was going to break up, and they were going to play their last show at either KZSU or Fiesta Grande, whichever one came first. It was like at that time. So me and Max had written some stuff, and because he was so pumped on it, he would invite me to all the rehearsals while they were rehearsing for this show. And when those guys would go out, to Puff Tough, he'd be like, let's jam those songs really quick. And kind of, I didn't really realize at the time, but it was not a good look. You know what I mean? But we would do it, but we were doing it so crazy and it was so different. Those guys were kind of like, well, what the fuck are you guys doing? So Stinkweed didn't like me, man. Like, I still really hadn't even met him yet at this point. I was in the same room with them. I knew who it was, I mean, that guy was a legend. But it's funny that when he passed away and talking to his mom, she remembered and she was like, he was really upset with you because you broke up Plutocracy in his mind. I loved that band and I saw how it went down, and I will say I had a big hand in it, for better or worse. I mean, for better, we got no less, which, something else. I mean, that was where those dudes, they were able to be free. You know what I mean? And that's amazing. I'm not saying I'm responsible for that, but I definitely was the one that pulled Max away from being into Pluto. Stinkweed was aware of that. His mom even knew,
Yeah, his mom knew, yeah.
And I told her, like, isn't it so crazy how we became such best friends, like, later, though? You know what I mean?
Can you tell me when you first met Kindred?
So the first time I met him, I'm pretty sure that Thomas hit me up and was like, hey man, I know you got a camera, because my mom had a 35 millimeter camera that I would kind of take around, to take pictures. I was like, yeah, I got a camera. He's like, yeah, because my friend did this like graffiti thing and he wants to take a picture of it and we can't find anybody with a camera. Like, can you take a picture of it? I was like, yeah. Must have had my driver's license at that point. And I think I went to Thomas's house, and then he took me to pick up Stinkweed and maybe like Lil Josh, or I feel like there was some other person or two there. And so I picked all those guys up, and then we drove out to where he did his piece, which was on the eastern side of 101, like over by where Lingso used to be. He went up and he did this like, and I remember the colors were so like, whoa, man, just like random. Like it was like yellow, brown, and orange. And then like, obviously, you'd run out of one color in one spot. But it was dope and it was big. And we took pictures. I remember he went up and posed with it, and I took some pictures. I must have given him all those pictures because I don't have that anymore. But it's funny because it appears on some Shed Dwellers collages. So it got recycled in the mix. That was the first time I met him. It was kind of like, oh, this is the guy who's going to take the picture. Okay. We didn't really build beyond that. It's like, this is Thomas's friend with the camera. So we did the thing, then we dropped those guys off. I took Thomas home and I went home.
I know when I remembered meeting him for the first time, he was a very animated character.
He was so driven. I think that was kind of the thing, he was, that blew me away when I met him, is he was driven. He was directing people. Like, people were listening to him. Like, everybody was kind of paying attention to whatever he was doing. And I didn't really know anyone like that, And I guess in a way, I was kind of like that, but I didn't have like the group of people to like do my bidding. But I was very much like telling people what we should be doing and introducing people to things. And I remember, I think maybe that time or maybe another time, Thomas brought me over to his house and I went into his room, and I remember he had the first Assuck album like sitting there, and I was like, oh shit, I want to get this record. He's like, oh man, this record's crazy. And I saw some records sitting around, and they had all this graffiti. And I was like, man, this guy's cool. You know, he's just like doing things that I'm interested in or I'm doing, but kind of coming at it from a totally different angle. You know, I only really knew him through Thomas. I would never say like, oh, I'm friends with that guy. You know, I think because like with that guy, especially like you had to catch his attention in a very specific way for him to actually notice you, even if you had met him multiple times. You know, multiple times you could have met that guy, but you hadn't crossed that line into like actually paying attention to you now.
The stories of Kindred are like, there's like everyone has a story. Everyone, you know what I mean? Like, and that's rare. It's a very rare thing.
Once you cross into where he's recognizing you, then it's like, oh shit, man! Now you got a nickname, you know, like
now you're fucked.
You'll be at a party, like you don't even know he's there to cross the room, and you just hear like JP.
Before he recognized me, he was actually in my house before at a house party, and he didn't know who I was yet.
Yeah, exactly. That's what, you know.
And he was smoking a big ass like fucking joint and had my sister's little tiny glasses on. And I was like, oh, it's Kindred's at my party. This is awesome. I'm like, hey, what's up, man? He's like, oh, who are you again? I'm like, oh, you're at my house.
It's my
house. So you and Max are jamming. You know, you're going to record with Bart. You guys happen to know Bart. You both recorded with Bart already.
Yeah, so
different bands.
So Max was like, I want to make a day with Bart. I want to record like 10 songs or something. Or, you know, however many songs we record. They just got to all be fast and short. You know, that was kind of his thing. It's like, okay. So who's going to sing? I don't want to sing. He didn't want to sing. So we hit up Rob Beckstrom. Thought he would be great, you know. He's like, okay, I'm down. But his girlfriend was pregnant. And as we get closer and closer, he's like, nah, I can't do this, man. I can't do this. My whole life's like unraveling, you know. So then I'm like, well, what about Dan? You know, or maybe even Max was like Dan Hogan, you know, who had come in Plutocracy to help them out because their bass player had left. He was from 976, right? Mm-hmm. So I think maybe Max was like, he's not going to be bitter about this ending because he's got his own band. Dan didn't want to be in the band, but we did convince him to sing on 2 songs. So he sings on 2 songs on that 7-inch. That was the best we could do. He wouldn't be in the band. Chris Dodge actually enters the picture before we record with Max, or before we record with Bart. So Max does an interview with Atmosphere, Dennis, the guy who was the 3rd guitarist in Clout. He did this amazing zine called Atmosphere. Became really good friends with Dennis, hung out with him a lot. Love that guy. Like, wish he still lived around here. I talked to him online. He's just a really great person, man, in music, and actually friend of Mean Dave. Like, he brings kind of Mean Dave into the picture later on, you know, like I guess in our 8th hour we'll get to that. Dennis does the final Plutocracy interview with Max, right? And then prints his zine and brings it to Fiesta Grande, Slap a Hand Fiesta Grande at Gilman, which is the final Plutocracy show. Chris Dodge picks that zine up at that show and reads in it how me and Max have this project that we're trying to figure out. We don't have a bass player, we don't have a singer, you know, just got this idea, and he drops all these band names of like our influences. Chris actually hits Max up like, hey man, what's up with this project? Like, looking for somebody to play bass, you know? Like, I'd love to be a part of it. And Max hits me up and I'm like, holy fuck, the guy from Sticky wants to be in our band? Like, what the hell, you know? You talk about the first show being nervous. This was when I was nervous. I'm like, well, yeah, you know, like, why not? So we meet up, we send Chris one of our rehearsal tapes. The music's so simple. He figures out pretty much all of it, you know. We meet up to rehearse. I think we rehearse actually at CFY in the live room. Run through it. He knows everything, basically, you know, figure out a couple things, get tired. I'm just like, holy crap, I can't believe this is happening, right? I'm like obsessed with Slap a Ham. Every record's like so sick. Neanderthal, Melvin's, Crossed Out. Like, holy crap. Like, this guy's going to be in my band. Sticky, No Use for a Name, all that shit. I was like really into it. So yeah, we do the recording. Hanging out with Chris is really cool. We realize that we're all goofy. And I think Max kind of has a chance to like not be political grindcore. We hit it off. Spaz is basically born out of that one session that we record with Bart, you know.
And so with Bart again, was that who chose to say Bart? Because there's a lot of recordings out there.
Who else?
Exactly, right.
It was kind of like after first time I recorded with Bart, it was like, okay, so now we make projects so that eventually we can bring them to Bart so he can record it. And that was the life. That was what you did. That was what you lived for. So something probably a lot of people don't know is when Spaz first started, once Chris joined, we didn't really have a place to jam. We couldn't jam full 3-piece in my parents' garage. It was just too loud, So we actually worked out a deal with Bart where we would rehearse in the live room of House of Faith once a week. We would pay Bart. It would be while he was doing mixing, so he didn't use that half of the studio. And we stored all of Max's drums in this little side closet. And part of that deal was if Bart needed drums for recording, he could use Max drum kit. So that's kind of how it was a very much CFY. House of Faith was a huge part of it. It was like, Sheep Squeeze to Spaz was just like, okay, now I'm just playing with different people, but at the same place,
And Eugene was still there?
Eugene was still there. The record store, I stopped going to the record store, like really, I'd go through there and check it out, but it was like, it wasn't being stocked. I don't really know where he was at with all of it, He still had the label, but I think it was kind of like CFY as the label record store was kind of on its way out as Spaz was starting to do shit, because it did close. Like the studio closed after we had done maybe 2 or 3, after 3 or 4 sessions there, maybe the land was sold, and so they could build a medical facility. The place where Bart is now, we wanted to record the second Spaz album, La Revancha, and the label gave us some money, and so we were like, okay, we have money, we could pay Bart, but we have nowhere to record. That's when he was mobile. I know this place in Oakland, Gorilla Euphonics, and I can record there. So we went there, we met the owner, Bart was there with us. Owner was super cool, and we were like, yeah, we'll record here, so we booked the time with, Bart took care of organizing it with the dude. And shit, man, how many years has Bart been there now? Like 30 years, you know what I mean? It was like one of the first times he ever recorded there. He's still there.
So Spaz has their first album. The name of the first album is?
Dwarf Jester Rising.
So in recording with the first album with Bart.
Yeah, we recorded at House of Faith. I used Rich from Immortal Fate's guitar rig. I think at this point, this was our 3rd recording there. And so we re-recorded some songs from our 2nd recording and then a batch of new stuff. But by then, I'd recorded with Bart so much, so had Max, and Chris was just old hat to the whole thing. Like, it was just really smooth. Well, the first thing we recorded was our first 7-inch.
And what was the first 7-inch called?
It's just, the self-titled, I guess. There's no title.
So, brand new bass player, somewhat kind of, you've been jamming with Max for a bit. How did the process go with recording on the first 7-inch?
It went really smooth, man. Like, compared to Sheep Squeeze, it just was a lot smoother. We weren't doing the vocals every take. I'd learned, and then those guys taught me, and it was a really, really easy thing. I just remember we were trying to get Dan to sing on more. Like when Dan did the vocals for the 2 songs, we're like, dude, do another one. Like, come on, man, just like read these vocals.
So when Chris was on bass, Dan was singing those 2 songs?
Yeah. I mean, Chris played bass on the whole record, but then we wanted to have a singer. Having Dan sing on those 2 songs was kind of like, well, this is the closest we're going to get to having a singer. And then so we filled in all the vocals on all the other songs, which we never really meant to be a 3-piece where me and Chris were trading off vocals and, in the studio, the 3 of us are doing it. I mean, that was never planned. That was kind of out of the necessity of singer we had bailed, guy we tried to replace him with wasn't interested.
and out of necessity became actually a blessing in disguise, because... Well, you still say no?
I mean, I don't know, man.
I think so, man. I guess your vocals are good. Do you like your vocals?
Definitely became a unique thing, you know? Yeah, I mean, I think that it wouldn't be the same band without all that. It wasn't by design, you know what I mean? It was like a necessity sort of thing. It's like everybody just not showing up or bailing, so okay, it's these three dudes, you know? I'm sure there's people out there watching this and they're just like, how are people bailing on being in Spaz?
Well,
But,
that's
you know,
the
it
thing.
was like,
After the fact, you know,
yeah, after the fact, you know, it's hard to get people to do shit, man. Like,
Dwarf Jester comes out, right? And you pressed it on vinyl.
so we got a deal with this label. This label said we'll put it out through. So now Chris isn't our band, man. Shit's opened up. He knows everybody. People are, they want to do shit with this guy. So now he's in a band. It's like, oh shit, like what's your band? I want to, you know, maybe I'll put it out, you know? So this label from Texas, Clearview, maybe he heard the 7-inch because, so we record that first recording and we're kind of like, okay, this is the demo, right? Comes out okay. Chris is just so ridiculously pumped about it. So a couple days later, he's like, you know what? I got some money. I'm going to put this out as a 7-inch. And me and Max are like, really? Like, shouldn't it just be like a demo, you know? And we'll record another. So he's like, no. He was so pumped on it. So he put out the 7-inch. And that kind of, you know, obviously, like, people discover Spaz. Because at that point, Slap a Ham was kind of like, even if you never heard of the band, they got a new release, you buy it. Because it's in the vein of that kind of music. So doors start opening up for us. This Clearview guy wants to do an album, like LP, CD. He's got a distribution deal with this Dutch East India, right? Which is kind of like big for an indie. To put it in perspective, bands like probably like Superchunk or Guar and stuff were probably like Dutch East India at that time. So it's kind of big. It's like our shit's going to be in Tower Records. It's going to be in Amoeba, all that. We don't have to show up and consign it. You know what I mean? Interesting story about this record is I recorded it when I was in high school. So I cut class. I had to organize with Max, like, all right, show up in the parking lot this time because classes are going to change and I'll just walk out to your car and then you can drive me to the studio. And so that's what we did. And then the day that I graduated high school, Max came to my graduation, swooped me up. We went skating like most of the day in San Francisco. Then we went to Alternative Tentacles office, which is where Chris worked at the time. John Yates, who was like graphic designer for Alternative Tentacles, and he had a label called Allied Records. He was doing the art for Dwarf Jester Rising. So we go to check it all out, you know, and everything. And come back from San Francisco, Max taking me to my parents' house, and we get to the end of the block, and the block's closed. They're like, you can't go down the street. There's a big fire. And I'm like, holy shit. I'm looking down the street. I'm like, that's kind of like in the middle of the block, like where my house is. To make a long story short, this guy across the street from my parents' house, his house caught on fire. My dad, I guess, was outside watering, saw him, went over there and was like, hey, you know, tells my mom to call 911, gets him out of the house. They start using the garden hose, you know, to like hit the roof. My dad's like, don't go back in the house, but it's some older cat. He ends up going back in the house, killed by the fucking blast.
Backdraft.
My dad sees that shit, dude. This cat Charlie that lived across the street from us. So I finally get to the middle of the block. Tomatoes are there.
Because of course.
Right? And my dad is like on oxygen with fire department. Gene Tomatis is like, your dad almost saved this guy's life. I'm like, you almost saved this guy? What the fuck? So then they tell me and I'm like, holy shit. But that was like the day I graduated from high school. I remember like going to Alternative Tentacles and being like, oh shit, I'm in the Alternative Tentacles office. And then John Yates is like showing me my fucking album. And then holy shit, my dad, like just mania.
So Dwarf Jester comes out to big fanfare or no?
Nah, not really. I don't think anybody got it really. You know, maybe once that record came out, like people were able to hear it. But I feel like we hadn't reached what we were trying to do. You know, we're still trying to figure it out. At that point, we were not really collaborating a whole lot on songs yet. We were still kind of bringing whole songs in. And I think when Spaz really clicked and the shit that people really like is when all of us are involved in the writing and arrangement, which kind of after after we recorded that, is when we kind of stopped just bringing whole songs. I think that we just realized that like we wanted to be maybe more cohesive, and you could tell like, oh, that's a Max song, that's a Chris song, that's a Dan song. My favorite part of being in a band is the writing process, and I love everybody putting input in. I can't be in a band where it's like one guy coming in with a song and then fucking writing everybody because they're not playing the parts exactly the way that he...
Yeah, otherwise it'd be a solo project.
Well, exactly. And that's like the whole reason to be in a band is to collaborate, you know, all of our skills and ideas and, you know, come up with a unique thing that can only be done by that group of people, like collaborating. So I think that's when Spaz kind of, after that album, for whatever reason, you know, we realized like we need to the collaboration songs that we had done on that album were our favorite ones, I guess. So we were like, okay, that's, you know, you come to the jam with like riffs, not songs. So, you know, we would come with all these riffs we came up with, and then you'd be, you know, okay, let's show us a riff. And then it's like, oh, I got one that goes like this, you know? And so just kind of building from there.
Second full-on album.
Yeah, this time we're at Guerrilla Euphonics. We're at the new spot that ends up becoming House of Faith, but wasn't at the time.
And
had a little budget, so we could spend 2 days on it, you know, and buy some pizza. Wrote all new material. I think we felt shitty for re-recording stuff on the first album. After it all, like afterwards, we're like, man, we need to, for the next album, it's all got to be 100% brand new, you know. That was where we hit like the stride of the band.
And was it tough to be in a band with also Chris, who also was doing a lot of other stuff on the outside?
Not really, because Chris he was like really professional and always made the time to jam. Whatever he was doing on the side, it never got in the way of what we were doing. So we started jamming at AML in East Palo Alto once House of Faith closed, like an old jam space from probably the late 70s. And we rehearsed there, No Less, ETO, like basically all that little group. You know, we didn't have a place, so we rented it hourly, and we were there for a while. Probably wrote the bulk of the La Revancha stuff there. Then eventually we moved to Downtown Studios in Hunters Point. Iyad had a room, hit me up, you know, we got space if you guys need a space. So we were like, well, the AML is, we can't leave our shit there. It's kind of sketchy. One of the owners had died and shit was kind of getting weird there. Like No Less got a bunch of stuff stolen. Yeah, so we were kind of like, yeah, maybe we should check out this other space. That was Downtown Studios, and like Dead Bodies Everywhere was in there on a different floor. So I'd see those guys. There were some other fools there. I'd see like Stoney Maloney was there doing some shit. So then we were there, and that was basically where Spaz was like from the rest.
When did you start to see that, like, damn, this band is like different from the other band?
Well, when we went on tour in 97 and like played in front of people in other areas, caught their reaction, it was more of like a legitimate reaction, where here I feel like people were kind of like, it was a joke, you know, they didn't take it serious, you know, but we also didn't really know how to present it. You know, so when we first started playing shows, we'd play like a 30-second song, and then we'd like talk or wait like a minute before we played the next song. I mean, there's like tape recordings that I have where the Gilman sound guys like heckling us. You know what I mean? Because it's almost like a joke. It's like Chris Dodge put out that record, the Blearg comp, you know, where it's like, what, like 100 bands with 300 songs on a 7-inch. So kind of the short, fast thing was like kind of a joke to a lot of people that didn't understand it from the extreme music world. You know, they were looking at it more from the pop punk thrift store. So they would make fun of it like it was a joke. But it was like, okay, I mean, you know, we're joking around. The songs are funny, but we're actually playing and trying to make the shit sound sick. I think when we toured, like, it was appreciated in a different way, where we were kind of like, oh, wow, like, you get it. Because at that point, we'd be like, okay, we need to play 6 songs, like, back to back, and figure out all these ways to interlock them before we take a break. So we got our live show tighter, you know, the presentation was better.
And then did you realize at this time your relationship with the Plutocracy guys, did that get better?
Yeah, I mean, they started No Less, and then No Less I mean, we did a lot of No Less Spaz shows. I think it was just kind of like they just need to figure out what they wanted to do. There was no bad blood.
There's no hard feelings or anything,
No,
right?
I mean, there might have been, but not discussed. I was always friends with Thomas all through it. I feel like we did discuss it at one point where he was kind of like, dude, what's up with Max, man? It's like, hella, he was very like honest with me, we were very honest and discussed it. And I was just kind of like, it's on Max, man. I mean, if he doesn't want to jam with you, I mean, what do you want me to do? Like, I don't want Plutocracy to break up, but I
Yeah.
also don't want like this guy to not be in a band. And you got No Less, and it's like way sick.
Is that where you guys have the family and the West Bay Coalition started up, you think? Or when did that?
So that kind of starts up like 96. That's kind of like Chestnut when you guys come into the fray too. Like there's a realization. It's like, wow, there's all these people like in Redwood City and, ETO in Palo Alto, Dead Bodies, wherever they were from. It was like mostly Redwood City. I remember Max coming up with this West Bay hardcore thing, and then it resonated obviously with Stinkweed, and he came up with the West Bay Coalition, and it was just kind of like, yeah, and I think we were all proud that, so many people like look to San Francisco, like, I got to move to San Francisco to make it. And it's like, well, why? I mean, why not just make where you're doing your music from, like, the it place? It was just a great time where we all were doing these little projects, man, and we just we pumped each other up. It was pretty amazing, man. Yeah, I think Max came up with the West Bay hardcore because he was really into all that straight edge shit, and he wanted to make like a shirt that had the collegiate font with like hardcore. He made that shirt with Neo Blender graphic, and that was it. And everybody was pumped, like West Bay. And it was just like, that's what we call ourselves. And then it just kind of went from there.
Spaz is playing shows. They are touring Japan at this time, right?
Yeah, I mean, we played some shows, mostly like when bands came through Gilman Street. There wasn't really bands playing fast back then in America, really. You know what I mean? It hadn't really caught on. It was kind of an English thing. It was a European thing. Just that extremely fast music. There was a handful of bands in America, right? One of them was Capitalist Casualties from Santa Rosa, Cotati area. So when any band came through like Psycho or Man is the Bastard, Rorschach, we were basically called, to play on the show. Capitalist and Spaz, like every show. Ken Sanderson, who did Prank Records, he started booking at Gilman, so he booked a lot of these shows and always gave Spaz and Capitalist the slot. We were trying to bring in like ETO, No Less, but back then, like if you blew your first interaction for whatever reason, it was kind of like, all right, then, I don't have time for these people. Like they're not taking it seriously. So there was a few like failed interactions, I think, that we tried to set up to like get people shows, because it's like, well, we don't have to play every show, So we played some shows and we kept recording. I mean, we were really like always writing new shit, always booking time with Bart. Very much like that Sheep Squeeze, like we're in the session and we're thinking about the next session. That was Spaz. And I think that's where we really clicked. We all wanted to write and record more than we wanted to play live. There was no like, oh, I want to play live so, all these girls can look at us, or, you know what I mean? It was like really just like we want to just keep writing shit and keep progressing this idea of this band and these riff ideas we have, and, trying to do different things. And at the same time, all these people were writing to all over the world with these cool bands, like, they want to do a split 7-inch, or they want us on this comp, or so that kept us busy because we're always getting offers to like do stuff, because me, Max, and Chris were very much part of the tape trading, letter writing world. We just had a lot of friends and connections, and, a lot of it overlapped, where like to look at a band like No Less from the same area where they didn't really have that, it's because they weren't doing that pen pal tape trading sort of thing. And that kind of elevated Spaz like internationally, regardless of playing at Gilman and all that stuff. We just had records, We were trading tapes. Max is like looking for like old straight edge live soundboard recordings from Cleveland. So he's tape trading with guys, to get that shit. And we build all these relationships. And then in 97, we went on a full US tour for 7 weeks. And that was kind of when, when we realized that people gave a shit about the band. That was kind of the first time that hit us. It was kind of jokey. Regardless of how much we put into it, it wasn't taken seriously in the Bay Area.
What was your one thing where you're like, oh, this is something that's bigger?
I saw how my friends reacted to it, and I would see like, we would play a show at Gilman, so I was doing graffiti. People I know through that scene like are coming to the gigs. Those guys would be ruckus in the pit. And we'd play a show and I would see a lot of these guys filing in while we were getting set up, and then we start playing and they would just go fucking crazy. And I'd look out and be like, man, these guys are they're getting everybody pumped up. They're starting the pit. They're keeping it going, picking people up, and kind of became this thing where it was like Spaz is playing and all the graffiti cats I knew came out. I mean, a lot of cats, That's where I met Mike Giant, Rebel 8. He came to a Spaz show with my homie Quake. That was kind of when I saw my friends reacting in that way. And then sometimes you could see it like being infectious, and other people who didn't know those guys, they get into it, and we'd be playing it. It's like, man, okay, now we're going to play the Wall of Death, and everybody gets into it and is going hard in the pit. But then when we went on tour, I mean, it was a totally different leveled up. Like fools showing up in full on lucha like outfits with signs, and like staging wrestling stuff while we were playing. I mean, it was crazy. It was kind of like, oh wow, you guys like actually paid attention to all this. And I think that shocked all of us. Like we did not expect that. And that was kind of like, wow, man. And, made a lot of lifelong friends, even like in people who were kind of like not really like, wow, that's not my thing. But the fact that people are reacting in that way, I give you credit for that, man. And it's like, yeah, well, we're bringing some heavy ass hardcore shit. Like, yeah, we got silly lyrics and we joke around, but the music's still heavy. Are you talking about Crush, Kill, Destroy?
Yeah.
Okay, so the story about that is that album really wasn't even meant to be. We get home from the 97 tour. We had a great time, but, there was certain things of the relationship that were strained. We weren't in a big rush to like get back together and play. Let's put it that way, right? So we might have jammed. We might have like met up to load everything into the room, that we were paying rent on. But then at some point, I think what brought us back together is we got offered to go to Japan. Well, no, take that back. I think we took a break, and then somebody instigated like, hey, let's meet up. So we started jamming again, and we started writing some shit like right off the bat. That first time we probably wrote like 2 songs. So we're coming and we're having fun, writing some shit. We don't have any obligations. Nobody even knows we're still doing shit. We have no shows. We're not playing locally. We're just meeting up every week to like write some shit. So we write a few things and then it just kind of fizzles out. Everybody's doing different shit. I think like Max had joined Capitalist Casualties because Matt Martin left. And then I don't think he had joined What Happens Next yet, but he may have. But we're doing other shit. And at the same time, I'm doing like the Shed Dwellers. I came home from the 97 tour and I had some money. I started working with the Dwellers in 96. We recorded a ton of stuff on some gear that, cobbled together from other people. Didn't know. I was a DJ and they were like, Stinkweed came up to me at Chestnut at a party one time and was like, can you make beats? And I was like, I don't have the equipment, but I'm sure I could do it, because I can scratch and cut and, I know this shit. So he's like, well, I'll get you some equipment, man, and we'll make some shit. You're going to be in the Shed Dwellers. I was like, okay, whatever that is,
He already had the name of the band.
Well, because it had already been a thing, but also like that was really the first time that he ever really paid attention to me, and it was like, boom, like you're going to be in the Shed Dwellers. You know what I mean? And that's the craziest thing with that fool. It's like, he's so like focused There was no like, well, let me see if this guy's cool before I ask him to be in the group. It's like, no, he's basically in the group. He tried to get out of it because he didn't have equipment, and I told him, I'll have equipment for you. You can't say no, right?
Yeah.
Unreal, man. I started making beats, trying to figure it out, you know. Big hip hop head, obviously. 1996, man. Amazing year for hip hop. Great albums. Like some of the greatest albums came out that year. That was a banner year. So, in the midst of that, I'm just in awe. Like, hardcore is not exciting me anymore. Like, I feel like everything is not as good as it was. Everything's not as exciting to me as it once was before. So I'm really gravitating towards rap and trying to make beats. So I come home in 97, have some money. I'm like, I'm going to buy something to try to make better beats. So I went to Gelb and I was like, I want to buy like the best beat making machine for rap. So they're like, well, the MPC 2000 just came out. Okay. So I bought that. Super hard for me to figure out how to use. You know, like I'm reading the manual. It's not like if you want to make a beat, do this. It's like all written in this really foreign way where I'm like, I can't wrap my head around this. I remember every morning I would wake up and I would see it. I had it on this little table and I would look at it from my bed and be like, this motherfucker right here. It was hard.
It was a challenge.
It was a challenge. I didn't know anyone who had one. So learn that. And in the midst of, you know, Spaz, like not really doing much, I was totally focused on doing beats. And so we got back together, we started jamming a little bit, and then it fizzled out. And then at some point, I'm guessing Chris was the one who contacted us and said, hey, this guy wants to fly us out to Japan, you know, do a tour for a week. 5 dates. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, let's do it, you know? So we all agree, we start rehearsing for it. We go out there. It's really fun, but you know, there's also problems. But we realized like, you know, we like to play together. So when we got back, we started relearning all that stuff that we had kind of started writing, you know, maybe the year before. And then we just kept writing some new shit. And in the midst of writing all that, Chris decides he's going to move down to LA. So we have time at Bart's. We do Crush, Kill, Destroy. You know, that's the record we're writing. Chris puts it out. And pretty much like right after it comes out, he moves to LA. So we play the last show and put it out. Then I went to Arizona. And then he was like, I'm moving to LA. So let's play like one final show.
At Gilman.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is we might have played after we got back home in 97, but that might have been when the rumor started where every time we played it was the last show. It was kind of a joke. People would be like, it's the last Spaz show. It's like so when we did say, well, we're playing our last show, there was a lot of people who were like, yeah, right, we've heard that before. It's like, no, this is 100% like this is the last show. Man.
I think me and Chris were drinking in Leach's old Rabbit. No, it wasn't the Rabbit. It wasn't the Rabbit at that time.
Yeah, the Somersault.
Yeah, the summer. Yeah, we were drinking in that one, and we missed Jello Biafra running on stage, apparently, at the actual official last show. Because you played with Melt Banana, no?
Huh?
Didn't you play with Melt Banana on the final show?
No.
No? Okay, so that was one of the rumored last shows.
So I think Melt Banana was one of those shows. We probably played like 2 or 3 shows between getting back from tour and going to Japan, and then the last show. And Melt Banana was definitely one of them.
Yeah,
and I think there was actually 2 Melt Banana shows over the course of 2 years. Where the first one we played, the second one they pulled out. We were supposed to like share gear. It was a whole fucking fuck up.
So then Kindred tapped you. He's like, oh, during this period, we're going to do music.
He was like, you're going to make these beats. So we started doing it, you know, and they were into it. And I was like, wow, I have no idea what I'm doing, you know, like I don't know how to buy records to make beats, you know. That was like I was buying records to DJ with, trying to learn how to do 2 copies, juggle, all that, scratching.
And I do remember you were a fan of DJ Qbert and all them from back in the days.
Oh yeah,
I remember I learned about all through the scratch pickles and everything through you.
that's the Bay Area shit right there, man.
Yeah.
See those guys around, like, they were just part of the scene of, if you were in the DJ culture buying records back then, like, those guys were around, man.
You were being a DJ and you decided to do the rap music, right? Shed Dwellers was something that was like super different. I would say from what you were doing before, because it was like insane. It was like I never knew anyone that was doing anything like that at that time.
Well, I think the thing that helped us out is like our bands were not the bands that would play at like a party. If our bands played at a party, it was like some fucked up degenerate shit where everything was gonna get broken. It was not gonna be like a girls dancing and all that. But with the Shed Dwellers, even though like lyrically it was a little ridiculously crazy, it had a beat and people dug it, and we could incorporate a set into a DJ. I could just start playing records, and so we started to rock a lot of parties because I just bring my turntables out to like parties. It was just, people were stoked, man. We had a party group where everybody could be partying and it wasn't crazy and, like, yeah. So we only did one official release. I tried for years to get everybody to get on board to like put a cassette together, and like I have mock-ups of all these releases in my collection that just never got duplicated, because somebody would disagree with it. And that was kind of part of the problem, really. Well, not really the problem, but it was a complex group, right? Where Stinkweed wanted everybody that could rap to rap. Anyone who could make a beat to make a beat. But then if you're trying to do it as a show, you got all these people rapping on the songs. You got a show, you want to do that song, you can't find this guy. You don't know if he's going to be able to show up for the show. It makes it really difficult. It ended up kind of becoming a core group of me, Stinko, Tizzo, Zach, and Dan, until Dan was gone. But Zach was always like a part of our live group. Even though he didn't really rap on a lot of the songs, he was on enough songs and he knew enough of the songs where he could back them up, hype guy style.
And did you meet Zach and everyone through Kindred?
So yeah, I met Zach through Kindred. I'd already met Tizzo, so when he brought Tizzo into the fold, I was like, I know this guy, but I haven't seen him in like a really long time. But the minute he showed up, this was at RHL, when he showed up to like do a session with us, he was like, I remember you, dude, Miss Pagura's science class. But he was hard, man. Like, he wasn't really at the level that everybody else was. Not like we were really like knew what we were doing, but he was really like leaning on like motherfucker, fucking, like constantly, right? One of our early first real studio songs, we went to Trainwreck and recorded there a song called Bring It To You Live. I rapped on it. I was the last rapper. I made the beat. Stinkweed, Dan, Lobo, and Tizzo. And when we were there, it was really early on Tizzo being a part of the group. And every time we'd be like, all right, when it was his turn to record, every time we hit record, he would do a different rap. And we were like, man, you gotta like figure out the rap and do it right. You can't change it every time. It was an awakening for him.
He never wrote anything down then, no?
Well, no, he did, but he was kind of still like listening to the beat, trying to figure it out. And we're like, no, man, you really have to like pick one thing and stick to it, And that was like the first song we ever did with him. Like, and that was like on a 2-inch reel, man. It sounds heavy. I have a recording. It's really good.
In this period here, you have Kindred, you have, Tizzo. Shed Dwellers is like an insane. It was like kind of like it was a rap group, but it's also like a punk group because you guys were, kind of like calling out people on the album and everything.
Well, we played a lot of punk shows. I mean, we had a punk rock. I see what you're getting at here. I mean, we were definitely hip hop. Like you fucking try to fuck with us, man. We're gonna put you on the record.
And it was yeah, but like that's punk though, right?
But that's also rap. I mean, rap is so braggadocio and calling people out. Kind of like, look, so nobody took us seriously, man, because people looked at us were like in rap, like rap heads. They didn't take us serious, man, because we played in bands. And they were like, well, this is your like side project. You guys are punk rockers or metalheads. You don't know about fucking rap. And it's like, nah, we know a lot about rap.
Yeah.
So we always had to prove ourselves. Always had to prove ourselves. And I think that was a big part of it, where we were very sensitive to that. There was a lot of parties that I would DJ, and they would maybe hop on the mic for a minute, and then people would talk shit, and it would end up escalating. Because they'd be like, you white boys fucking ain't shit. And it's like, well, I got two dudes that are going to freestyle battle you, and I'm on the cut. Like, what do you got? You got a DJ? We were very much tested a lot. And I think we just, it hardened us where it was kind of like, well, you know, beyond just like having fun making this music that we're excited about, like we have to like really kind of come aggressively with it, you know, because people aren't taking it seriously.
And eventually, I think they did, no? Because, like, you know, Kindred.
I don't know. I mean, I just think we just kept going, you know? I think at some point we were kind of like, you know, man, like, fuck all these other, you know, it's like, why care what these people think? We just want to make dope shit. So we played a show, Shadow People, like later. And it was Shadow People with Sacred Hoop, Third Sight, and some other, I think there was a DJ, maybe Mike Boo. We did at Chemo's. So it was like a real legit hip-hop show, but I think we booked it. I think maybe me and Stinkweed booked it. I remember going there, and the first person who showed up after, you know, we were the first people there setting things up, and then Z-Man showed up. And I never met Z before, right? We're like, oh, who are you, you know? And he's chopping it up, and he's all pumped. We're stoked. Like Stinkweed, we're like, oh yeah. We're kind of like, wait, you're in Sacred Hoop? I thought Sacred Hoop was like white guys, you know? I didn't even meet Luke that night. Meeting Z and just his whole vibe, like it kind of made us, we already met Jihad from Third Sight, and he was cool. He got us. He hung out with all these Redwood old school skater guys and punk people, you know? So he was kind of like, you guys are the crazy. You guys are crazy because you got Stinkweed saying crazy shit. He understood, hey man, it's rap. I'm not going to front on you guys for being a rap group, you know, because you got it down. You got guys scratching on turntables, you got the beats, everybody's rapping. That point was kind of like, all right, now we're in a little scene where people understand us a little more. We were being held to a different standard, you know, and they were looking at our rock, all the rock stuff we did as like a negative thing. And it's like, why? We're just like rocking all kinds of music, you know? Shadow People was, we didn't really get into why it became from the Shed Dwellers to the Shadow People. So Shed Dwellers was, I joined up with them in 96, and I was a part of this thing. You know, I was producing a lot, recording a lot. I was basically the only guy with turntables, so I was the only scratching guy. It kind of morphs into Stinkweed getting like more people on it, and more people and more people. And we're trying to do these shows, and it's just like we're sitting around all day trying to call this one motherfucker that he wants to do a song, and where's this guy? And it's like he won't answer his phone. It's like, man, I don't have time have somebody who won't answer their phone that you're trying to do a whole song with at the show that we have coming up on Friday. You know what I mean? Like, I want to work with people who show up to the rehearsal, you know, even if the rehearsal is sitting in a car listening to the instrumentals on a boombox so everybody knows when they come in. Why isn't that person here? Then we're not doing that song. That was a constant struggle with me and Stinkweed and like his homies. And I mean, they were my homies too, but I was kind of like, hey, man. Yeah. And even if that guy's here, like I'm looking at him and I'm like, you're not going to show up and Berkeley on that night. I can already tell. That's a lot of work. You got to pay a bridge toll. You know what I mean? You need to get a ride, whatever. Shadow People was kind of like condensing it down to like Tizzo and Stinko. I came back from going to recording school and I was like, if you guys want to do a group, I just want to do it with you two because you're the only people who show up. But they were also like problems that big you know, I mean, they were their own worst enemies, you know, to get anything done. Yeah. But that was like my first step kind of into, we need to have these people. We're hanging out at least once or twice a week. We get a show, can find these guys. You know what I mean? It was like easy, no stress, no mystery. So that's kind of how the Shadow People evolved. And initially, the first demo was just Stinkweed because I came back from school, I didn't tell anybody, and he was the first person I contacted, right? So I was like, well, I don't know, man, if I want Tizzo to be a part of this because it's kind of flaky, you know. And then he was like, he vouched for him and brought him back in. I wanted to have a group where it was really easy to perform, and then the Shadow People did a bunch of shows. And the funny thing with the Shadow,
sometimes without Tizzo though too.
Probably a few. But so when we started doing that, I was like, I'm gonna promote it. So I made all these like I made fake like 8x10s, like a movie like 8x10, and I put them out at like all the record stores. I remember this one guy hit me up from like East Bay, like Newark or something, and he was like, I want to interview you for whatever, you know, some internet thing that he had. It was early internet. Like, I'm gonna put you on this thing, right? It was so weird because it was like a rap rock kind of thing. I mean, I don't really know what was going on, but I just remember like the guy showed up at my house and I opened the door and he's just like standing there with this big ass like crazy bong that looked like a dragon, and he was like,
whoa.
yeah, and he was like, yeah, Shadow People, you know? Like, what? Man, I don't want to be like an insane clown posse kind of, you know, like group. You know, I want it to be real hip hop. That I wanted to just do some straight up like Bronx hip hop kind of shit, you know. So then we did Shadow People, recorded that album, and that was really fun. That was like we were kind of really recording an album. But at home, like I had gear at that point, like some ADATs, and then we mixed it down at the studio that I ended up working at through all this great gear with this amazing engineer, Robert. I hope you're doing all right wherever you are, man. Just a really cool guy. He loves Stinkweed. And Stinkweed was really into the recording process for, you know, how crazy you know, everybody thinks he is. Like when it was time to like patch in some kind of cabling or figure out some kind of we need to wire this thing, it was like, man, he was like at full attention. And so we did that. We played a bunch of shows, and then shit, man, what happened? I don't know. Like I met Luke Sick in the midst, and we did a little project called Underbucket. I met Luke Sick at KZSU through Mike Rosas. So I used to do a radio show with Leach at KZSU, the Nosotros Project. And Mike Rosas brought Luke down to the studio. I don't know, I think, you know, it was like, oh, I got some beats, and we hooked up, and we started working on that project. But the Shadow People guys were really jealous. And it's funny because a buddy of mine was talking about that Underbucket project the other day, and he was like, you should reissue that, man, you know? And I was like, wow, I'm remembering that Luke got Tizzo to rap on one of the songs. Tizzo did a verse, and Stinkweed was here at the house when he did it. And when he finished, Stinkweed was like, you should erase that. You shouldn't be on this song. And convinced him. Me and Luke finished what we were doing, and he came back out. He's like, you got to take me off this song. So he erased it, and then Luke did a second verse. Because Stinkweed was like, man, he was not happy that I was working with Luke. But I was like, I got beats for days, man, you know?
But imagine if Kindred and Luke together.
Well, they did, but it took another like 10 years.
Yeah.
Right? And then we'd go to Low Budget, No Budget. And they basically, you know, co-produce that with me. That was 100%. Those guys were here like every day. And that was like the pinnacle, I think, of Stinkweed's lyric writing, is when he finally got back with Luke and kind of like them pushing each other and feeling each other out. I think the thing is like he's really well read, and he writes, you know, and he's deep in the linguistic side of it all, where Stinkweed is been rapping for so long that he's honed his way to talk on a rap where it's so effortless. His ability to do that blew Luke away, who's like, I can't say it as simply as you can, you know, because I just can't. I'm more of I add all these words. And I remember him saying that Stinkweed was a guy who could say exactly what the street wanted to hear. Just make a song.
Yeah.
And anyone on the corner would hear it and be like, fuck yeah. You know what I mean? There was no like, I don't know if I like this. It was immediately like, for the heads.
Would you agree with me and say he was a generational talent?
As far as what?
As far as the way that he could come up with, and it's not just with lyrics, it's the way that he talked was a generational talent, I think, because he would say something and it would be like a new everyday word.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he's just kind of, yeah, stinkweedisms, man. I got
Mhm.
him, like,
Yeah.
and I think that was his thing. He took like he really focused on street slang. You look at like a group like Wu-Tang, you know, and
Mhm.
all the slang, they just came out with that first album and it was like the slang was crazy. It changed all of rap. Everybody started saying words that they said, it didn't matter where you were from, you know, it was just
Yeah.
like so radical. And Stinkweed's the kind of guy where, yeah, he processes something through his brain and then creates the slang and then everybody starts saying it.
So Underbucket had just released.
Yeah, so we did this Underbucket record CD and tried to kind of spread it around. And then I kind of lost touch with Luke after that. We did a show, actually. Paul Barfo asked me if I would hop on the show, Stork Club. Underbucket played at the Stork Club with
So
Godsmack.
how did that go? How did hip hop go with Punk Club?
I think like it was so unique, and the fact that we were like using turntables and not computers or some kind of thing that was looked at as a being like the, you know, the antithesis to punk. Records on turntables and this is how you create your set was very like accepted because it was a trip.
You were like bringing your records with you, whereas everyone else just had it all on like a USB.
Well, shit, not even then we didn't have the USB yet. There was no digital DJing then, you know, if you were going to play your own tracks, you played them on like a CDR, a CD like DJ fucking setup. At that time mini disc was like a thing and it was cheaper to buy a mini disc where you could record that and it wouldn't skip. The CDJs skipped, so you could play the mini disc and it wouldn't skip on these stages that were barely stages with people jumping around. So when Shadow People played, I had bought a mini disc player recorder at Fry's, and I always put all of our stuff on that because I knew it wouldn't skip. And then I brought records to like scratch over the top of the mini disc, and that's how we did it, man. But then after the Underbucket project, like I got into Funeral Shock, and I kind of stopped making beats for several years. I was just really focused on like getting back into playing guitar, you know, in a band again. So Funeral Shock was me and One Arm J were like the founding members. I was dating this girl and she lived down the street from One Arm J at the time. So I used to go to his house and hang out. Agents wasn't doing anything. Dead Bodies wasn't doing anything. He didn't really have a band. So we were hanging out drinking beers a lot, listening to records. And I was like, man, we should just start a band, like a simple hardcore band, you know, something easy where we could just get up there, bust something out and then bounce, you know, nothing crazy. No, like try to get a record deal or whatever, you know, like the anti, like have fun, a party band. I was at a Burnt Ramen show and I ran into Athena from 6 Weeks, Vote Sec, you know, and she was like, oh, what are you up to? And I was like, oh, me and Jay are trying to, you know, start this band, but we're trying to find a bass player. She's like, Jeff Robinson, you know, he'll be in your band. She's like, please, he needs a band, you know, he's dying to play.
Please get him in a band.
So I asked him and he was like, yeah, you know, I'll do it, you know. So we were jamming at Lennon Studios, but we didn't have a drummer. Jay hit me up and was like, hey, you know this guy Dave from Wolfman Records? And I was like, oh, I traded records with that guy, you know, he seems cool. And he's like, yeah, man, I traded records with him and he plays drums. I'm thinking about asking him to play drums in the band. I was like, shit, go for it, man. You know, that's somebody we kind of know. So he hit Dave up and Dave was like, yeah, I'll play drums in the band. So then we set up the first practice and then Jay's like, I can't make the first practice. Which is funny because it's kind of like sets the precedent.
Of course.
For like, can't make the first practice, right? So then the first practice is me, Jeff, and Dave. And Dave's like very like trying to do it, but also like, I don't know what the fuck you guys are doing. So we gotta like show him like, no, we want to do this beat, you know, that boop bap boop bap boop bap boop bap. He's like, oh, okay. Never played it before, but he can do it. So me and Jeff are kind of like, all right, man, this is kind of cool. I think me and Jeff also are like, it sounds like legit 80s hardcore because it's, you know, the drummer just figured out how to play this beat right now. And we were just hooked, I think, at that point. Jay finally made it, probably to the next jam. And that was the band, you know. We did that for a little while. Dave was always kind of struggling with it. Like, I can do it, I can't do it. I don't know if I can do it, you know. Mean Dave.
Mean Dave. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
He was Dave Wolfman back then.
Wolfman.
Was Dave from Woozor. Dave was kind of, you know, wishy-washy for a little while, and eventually he stuck with it, man.
Yeah.
You know? And I think once it finally, he decided, like, because we were kind of like, if you don't want to be in it, fine. If we'll work with you. It's like, you know, and initially I told him, hey, man, I was in a band where nobody asked me what I thought about anything, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it was frustrating because if I had an opinion, it was like they just discounted it, you know? So if you don't want to be in this band, like tell us and it's all good.
Yeah.
No hard feelings, man. Just be totally upfront. From the jump, that was Funeral Shock. Like be upfront. Dave finally settled in and man, I mean, it was a great rhythm section of Jeff and Dave, man. I mean, you know, we recorded some records. So we got the Compound, we got the storefront.
Is that when you had your Compound recording session?
Yeah. So right at the beginning of Funeral Shock, we ended up getting the Compound, which was like a storefront in North Fair Oaks, Redwood City.
Which is where my band recorded with you too.
We recorded the Feldmans.
Yes.
So Frank lived in the back, and there was like a live room, Riff Merchants practice space. I went in as like on the half or third to have a recording studio there. Quickly realized like I really need my own space in order to make this work properly, you know, but I did what I could and, you know, stuck it out for maybe a year. But yeah, I did several recordings there. A lot of them were released. So I recorded Elephant Man's side of the split with Bastard Squad.
Nice.
That's probably my favorite recording we did there. I recorded Best Pals, their side of the Smirk 7-inch. Recorded You Guys, which never got released. Funeral Shock, the first 7-inch. And then some compilation tracks. Half of Riff Merchant's Electric Bukkake record there. A lot of rap stuff that I'm not really sure where it all went. I don't know what the releases were, but we did a lot of rap stuff. So yeah, held that down for a while. Funeral Shock went on tour with the Riff Merchants in 2004 for like a couple weeks through like Northwest, Southwest. Tour fell apart at the end. It fell apart. People were pissed off and angry at other folks, but it kind of broke everything that had been working up to that point with everybody. Mm-hmm. Like it broke it, where I was basically kind of excommunicated from the Doom Riders like circle
for about a month. But then you got
I mean, there were certain people who were like, no, you know, I don't believe anything that I'm hearing. And, you know, it was a messy little thing. Moving past it, we're all good now. Jeff was like, I don't want to break Funeral Shock up. I've only been in the classic conversation with Jeff, man, I'll never forget. He was like, I've only been in 2 bands, Capitalist Casualties and Funeral Shock. And neither band is breaking up. Okay. Jeff gets Kenny from the Neighbors. Kenny from the Neighbors wants to sing for Funeral Shock. Okay, but he lives in San Diego. Oh, but he's going to move up here soon. Okay. So we start doing these trips to San Diego and performing with this guy. He comes up here. We do a show.
Wait, so you traveled to San Diego to jam with the guy?
Well, to play a show. We weren't even jamming. I think we rehearsed with him one time. The first time we played maybe was at Burnt Ramen. And he came up like a couple days before and we ran through the set and we're like, okay. Then we played Burnt Ramen. It was good. The next time we went down south, we played down there. Then it was good. Then it was kind of like, we're going to play up here again. And I think I was just kind of like, I like Kenny. You know, I met him when I was in Spaz. always a supportive dude. When we're in San Diego, you know, you're gonna see him. He's gonna be cool. But I just wanted to jam with people and write. You know, I'm a writing guy. I want to jam every Saturday or whatever and like work on new stuff. And if this guy is not able to be there to be a part of it, then it's kind of like hard for me to. That's on you guys if you want to have him be in the band. Jeff brought this guy Tom in, who was a younger kid. It was good. I knew him. You know, he was a record selling guy, so that was good because I got a discount or whatever. You know, I had the hookup on the records, but at the same time, he was also not really where I saw somebody who would sing for the band. We worked on that for a while, and then eventually it just kind of fizzled out, you know. So I didn't really do a band for a long time after that. I really focused on rap. Well, so also at this time, like internet ability to like upload audio and share it is happening, right? So it's kind of like you can make these beats and then share them with people. You can email them to somebody across the world, you know. It's like a new thing. So kind of started doing that kind of stuff, just really
focusing. So you're selling beats?
A little, but just kind of networking beats, playing my stuff for people and hearing other people's stuff and trying to figure things out. Grand Invincible started, me and Luke started, we reunited and we started working on what became the Grand Invincible project at this point. He's so prolific and driven, like we really just did a lot of stuff. You know, he pushed me to make a lot of stuff. I had kind of a stockpile, but I wasn't playing in a band. For many years, I didn't play in a band till Dave Whitty hit me up and was like, hey, I want to do a project with you, you know, where you write all the riffs. And I was like, man, I got hit by a car and I had part of my elbow taken out. I can't even like bend my arm, you know, that's on the fretboard.
Like, your biking accident that you had.
Yeah, he's like, whenever you get around to it, man, you know, let's do some shit. But they were really pumped, so he ended up coming out here, and me and him ended up jamming and trying to come up with shit. And that became Deny the Cross. And they were like, well, you can have anybody you want, you know, play bass. Like, you find the bass player. So like, well, fuck. I mean, obviously Frank. And Frank knew Dave. Getting Frank and Dave together with me and then Carlos from Black Army Jacket. We kind of already, you know, knew each other for a long time. So we did that project. And then fast forwarding, like, you know, Frank moves to Gilroy, and then he links up with Curly, and they start doing their Curly and Franco show, and I'm listening to it, like laughing my ass off, and they're doing a show where they're kind of like, we're trying to start this band, you know, they have this whole concept, and I was like, man, I kind of want to be in this band, but I can't be in a band with guys in Gilroy, and checking myself, and then they actually hit me up, you know, they're like, yo, like, would you do this? And I was like, shit, man. I mean, I would love to, but I can't really commit to doing a lot if it's in Gilroy, you know? Like, I just can't get down there. At this point, I'm a dad, you know, and I got a full-time job. It's like, just doing any kind of artistic thing is, you know, needs planning, advance notice. They're like, man, it's going to be chill like once a month, you know? So I'm like, all right, I'll give it a shot. Thomas was supposed to be the drummer originally. Then he bailed. And then Frank got Chris from Dead Pressure. And I was like, oh shit, man, I know Chris from Dead Pressure, man. Every time I go to a show in San Jose, that's like the guy that I'm hanging out with. So I was like, okay. So we jam. I'm like, man, Chris, he knows it all. We don't have to explain it. He's just a fan of everything that we've done. He gets it. You know, you just play it. And he's like, I know. He knows the pocket, everything. So just great, man. Great chemistry, you know.
First, actually, what's the name of the band?
Hard Foul.
Hard Foul.
It was a Curly and Franco concept. You know, Warriors were winning, and, you know, they were on their streak. So they were like thinking of a basketball themed band, right? I don't watch any basketball. I don't even know anything about sports. So I was like, okay, you know, like I can get it, but I'm not, you know, I can't add anything from the sports spectator side, right? We managed to do it as a loose concept, you know, kind of thing. So, I mean, Hard Foul is kind of, you know, that was a thing that we did. There's no plans to revisit that.
Oh, you're not revisiting that anymore?
I mean, maybe we'll do something with those folks, but I don't think it will be that. So, you know, still doing Grand Invincible. We're doing a split 7-inch with a group from Malaysia. Indonesian labels putting it out. The group.
How did you get a hold of someone from
Malaysia? I just know motherfuckers all over the place, man.
Prolific like
They
that.
reach out, and this guy reached out and he's like, hey, I kind of want to, there's this rap group here and they're kind of like punk rock guys, and check them out. He sent me the tracks and I was like, wow, these guys are crazy. They're like scratching, their shit's like political minded, about their struggle. It's just raw and dope. And I was like, this is so cool, man. And he was like, I'd love to do a split 7-inch. And I was like, I'm on board, because if anything, if we can help expose this group to people outside of their country, it's just so cool to do a hip hop record with people that are not rapping in English. So that's something we just finished. We got the master back. We're working on the art right now. That'll be soon. I think they just finished recording. I was kind of waiting for them to record before I kicked it into gear. And then me and Shane, my homie Shane, aka Kegs US. No, this is Shane. Shane, that's the Shane Nesbitt.
Okay. So Shane that cuts the hair is the one that you're...
Shane Nesbitt.
That's what it was. Okay.
So he's got he's a barber. He had a record store back in the day, like a rap record store. You bring back the shed dwellers or shadow people and calling people out, like you were saying.
Yeah.
There's a diss to him on that shadow people, because we went in there to try to sell the record and he was fronting. Because we had a beef, like a graffiti beef that was probably like 10 years deep at that point. But we tried to kind of go in there and just be like, all right, pretend it doesn't exist, And he wasn't having it. And Stinkwood was really upset. But I was like, well, what do you expect, man? Like, like if like the shoe was on the other foot, like you'd be like, yeah, what are you going to come in here with this 10-year beef and try to pretend like it doesn't exist?
Kindred and him would have hella got along.
Yeah, it would have taken we would have needed some steps.
A lot of beer. There
would have been some steps to it, right?
Yeah.
But so me and Shane, we got this beat tape just came out. I got all this shit, man. Grand Invincible, The Result LP coming out on vinyl on Iron Lung at some point.
Whoa.
The cassette came out, sold out. Then I got another beat tape with these other guys, with some famous guys, like his label's putting it out, but it's not out. I don't even want to out it. It's some big indie punk guys label's first release is this other beat tape that I made like a year ago. And I'm just waiting on it. Dank Goblins LP on Iron Lung. Well, that's me and Frank and Luke and my homie Andreas from Vegas on drums. That's some weird stuff.
Is that more hip hop or is that more
like an instrumental beat, chopped drums with samples, and then Frank's just playing bass ridiculous all over the top.
Well, he's just a ridiculous bass player.
He's crazy. And then I'm working on an album with this guy named Big Sammy right now. He's from out like Sacramento. So I'm working on that. Got a couple Grand Invincible tracks. Just always kind of making beat stuff. Like I haven't been playing in a band with guitar in a long time. Just, just hasn't come up.
But you know what? You're continuing to doing some of the most amazing work that I've ever seen come out of any place.
The music, it's all a part of it, and never tried to really go outside and like be like, oh, we need to get this famous person to like do this cover art. You know what I mean? Like that actually kind of happened with Deny the Cross. The guy that got to do the art, it was just like, I was like, wow. So after all this, like waiting and paying money, like that's what you got, Sticker design. I was like, this is an album cover. And then I was like, well, let me hit up my homie Mark McCoy from Charles Bronson. He's kind of doing some interesting shit. He ended up doing the cover, and now he's doing all these covers, and they're all kind of like referencing this cover, I'm like, oh, that's cool, man. Get your money. But it's like our album, I think, was kind of the pinnacle of that design that now he's pimping out, which is like fresh, man. Get that money, I got nothing to get money with,
Well, that makes two of us for sure. Like, if there was a Mount Rushmore of Redwood City, you would be like the George Washington up there, man, for sure. Like, and that's my question to you. Who else would be on on what you would say? Because to me, and to a lot of people I know, you would be up there as a George Washington, right? Who do you think would be on the Mount Rushmore of Redwood City for the person that is the George Washington of Redwood City?
Shit, man. I mean, you gotta have Stinkweed up there.
You have to have Kim, yeah, for sure.
I don't know who he would be. You know, I mean, I don't know, man.
He would probably be Theodore Roosevelt. We'd have to like recharge the Theodore Roosevelt. Wouldn't he be Roosevelt though? No.
I mean, okay. I kind of like, and that's one thing about these Redwood kids is like everybody's very like, even if you're proud and you're gonna flex at the time with your skills, like you're very reserved. Kindred was like not he had shy moments, man, and it's funny, but yeah, I don't really know. You know, I guess Max.
Yeah,
he really kind of put a lot of this on point. Like Max was a very vocal person, and then beyond that, man, I don't know. Maybe you.
I would say myself from this interview, I would want to put Thomas.
See, I don't think knowing Thomas, he wouldn't want to be on there. You know,
he's the one that introduced you to Kindred.
Yeah. Thomas was, you know, like moving forward to like Chestnut, like he was the youngest brother, right? So
yeah,
he would introduce you to Paylone.
Even introduce you to Snowman.
I think something about Redwood City guys though, and the whole Mount Rushmore thing is like none of these people want to be on it, put up on a pedestal and like noticed for
anything. It's too late. You know? It's too late. I end every single one of these episodes with quick shots, but I'm just going to go into one question since we're running out of time. The one question is this: what do you think of the young people of today?
I hope that they'll maybe, you know, be able to change this old, archaic, political shit that we're in, man. It's really all I can hope with these kids, that they can create their own future that's better, you know, than what we lived through and where we're headed. They're so advanced, man. I don't know, man. We'll see.
We'll see. But Dan, again, thanks. Sorry I kept you up for like hours, but like
I knew it was gonna. Once we did the first one, I was like, man, we haven't even scratched the surface, man.
Well, there's a reason why, because your story is phenomenal.
Like the first person to ever get all that publishing zine stuff.
My one thing I told you at Chris's thing, which holds true to this day, is every time I have a conversation with you, I feel smarter.
Yeah, man, it was fun.
We'll do it again when you conquer the world.
Ah!
That's the next step.
No, don't need that. Don't need that in my life.
All right, man. Well, good night.
All right, JP. Take it easy, man.
Bye.